Hybrid training is not just lifting and running. Hybrid training is not competing in hybrid races. There's no such thing as hybrid sport. A more robust cardiovascular system is going to let you do more quality work over a given session, and it's going to keep you physically and mentally fresher longer into your session.
Time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk, and today the guest is Alex Viada. Did I say that right? Viada.
But everybody has always said Viada.
It doesn't matter because I screw everybody's name up.
You know what?
It's become part of the podcast. So if I ever nail it, then
something's wrong.
Yeah, then something's really wrong. I'm best-selling author of The Hybrid Coach. You're a coach, international educator, been around forever, the founder and do everything for complete athlete performance.
Complete human performance.
Human performance. And you like to make things simple and the simple complex. You know, I've been following you forever and all the way. Actually, I'm just going to jump in with the first question because I've been just focused on this for like the last hour. Is your dad drug you to your first swim meet when you were 4.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then you pop up on the radar like 20 years later.
Yeah.
Squatting 700 and running with this giant thick headband, which was not cool at the time, but is cool now.
It is cool now.
You were a trendsetter.
It is cool
that.
now. Yeah.
Who were you in high school? Like, where did you go from that? You know what I'm saying? Because I'm always fascinated in athletic development, especially in the younger years.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's the developmental phases, and you're being thrown in a pool kind of like at the right age.
Yeah.
You know, Russians were doing it like even younger. How that progressed through high school? Like, who were you in high school?
Oh man, that was the best lead off you possibly could have done. I love it. Yeah. So honestly, high school, and I do give a lot of credit to my parents for this because, you know, partially explains probably why I do what I do now. Middle school, high school was all about trying to throw me into as many activities as possible. You know, like I said, I literally got, I'll say thrown into the pool, just nobody calls CPS retroactively on my parents for that, but like learn how to swim really early on. I mean, my mom took me to horseback riding lessons, you know, did track. I lived overseas, so I played soccer growing up. My parents would just keep throwing me into every possible activity they could. And going into high school, definitely kind of a nerdy kid. 7th grade, 8th grade, started playing football in 8th grade because I just moved back to the US. That I was a little bit, I was just a nerdy kid playing football, but started playing football, I played tennis. I played, you know, a little bit of lacrosse, a little bit of ice hockey. That's kind of who I was kind of one of these kids who was just on almost every single team and not really great at any single one, but had a really good time doing all of it.
Was football the first anaerobic type sport?
Football was, because I did wrestling, but that was definitely aerobic. Football really was, I think. And I was a bit of a smaller guy. So first I started out playing linebacker in 8th grade, but then I was over at safety. So I was still a little guy who did a lot of running then. But I was always kind of a naturally stronger kid, but never really excelled at strength sport. Like was never really seriously into lifting or anything else. But I think the sheer variety of things I did kind of kept me in pretty decent shape, like pretty much ready for a lot of things. Because, you know, when you're doing track, you're doing wrestling, you're playing football, you're getting a little bit of that, you know, they always say kids should be doing is just doing a little bit of everything, like don't specialize too early. I was definitely doing that.
Were you passionate about any of these things, or was it one of those things that your parents are just throwing you in there to keep you busy?
See, that's a really good question too, because I wasn't passionate enough about them at the time to do any one in great depth. And I think that's actually why I kind of vanished for a while in college. Was I never played any sport at the level where I could either play, because I went to a D1 school. I wasn't going to be playing any sports there. And I didn't love each one enough to do it on my own, like as a part of a club team or anything else. So I kind of fell off. Like I didn't really have an identity when it came to sport, when it came to viewing myself athletically. Because I think for me as a kid, sports were just something I did, but they weren't really who I was in any respect. And so, you know, as much as I've always said a good variety of athletic development is good for kids, I think it's really also important that kids do get the chance to really sink their teeth into what they love doing. If they really love a sport, like keep them encouraged to do other things, but let them find some kind of identity as well, because I think that's what's going to keep driving their interest over time.
So what was a catalyst that pulled you into becoming passionate? I'm just going to say about exercise. We'll define the hybrid thing here a little bit.
Yeah, well, honestly, it was, so when I went to college, I dropped everything. Now, when I was a 16, 17-year-old kid in high school doing all these sports, I could eat, 12 by 12 pan of my mom's deep dish lasagna every night and be just fine. Went to college, gained a whole bunch of weight, stopped doing everything, probably went from about 168 in high school to about 250 in about 2 years the wrong way.
Yeah.
And really had troubles with that. Like suddenly I didn't really even see it coming, just started gaining weight, getting slow, went the exact opposite direction for a year after that. Put everything I had into losing weight.
What was the reason for that?
Honestly, it was just a moment of realization. It was just saying, okay, wait a minute, like I've let myself go too far down this direction. Let me see if I can, shed some of this off. And it was almost just this, and this is kind of interesting, it was kind of this psychological idea that whatever I do, I want to be good at now. And for me, I wanted to be really good then at losing weight. I was like, all right, this is an objective now. It's just crossed the threshold. I'm getting winded going up flights of stairs. I've lost all my athleticism. I'm not even just like the big strong kid. I'm just a big kid. I don't like that. And so I lost a whole bunch of weight. Started eating one meal a day, then started eating half a meal a day. Was on like 400 calories a day, fat burners, all that. It was a very, very science-heavy approach with regards to the supplements I was taking. But again, it was a little bit, then went in the opposite direction. Lost almost 100 pounds, lost all my strength, and then said, okay, now what? And
now, when you say strength, how are you defining that at the time if you're not training in the weight room?
Well, I think I was almost so frail at that point that, even just picking up my backpack was getting challenging. I was wasting away.
Okay.
And, a lot of that was, and I think this is always one thing we can talk a little bit about too, but it was a full blown eating disorder at that point. And I think a lot of young guys deal with that in some way or another, whether it's losing weight or being a certain size or anything else. For me, I was just like, all right, I'm going to be the leanest, smallest guy possible, ate nothing, got really, really skinny. I hit a real crisis point. And then I said, okay, I've got to stop doing this. I'm going from one extreme to the other. Let me actually focus on getting back to actually training and doing something good for myself. So that's when I discovered at the time some of the online message boards on weight training and, some of the real old school message boards, and just started saying, all right, I'm just going to start lifting. And I'm not playing sports anymore, but let me actually try to make myself into someone who's semi-athletic again.
How did that change your thoughts on nutrition then?
It changed it a lot because I realized that everything at that point, the whole idea of eating just to lose weight or not eating to lose weight, as the case may be, was completely antithetical to any sort of objective that you have physically. You can't get stronger. You can't improve your physique if all you're doing is, eating as little as possible. It's interesting because that exact moment there, when I started thinking, okay, I want to actually build muscle coming from this bare minimum, immediately set me down the path of, okay, I have to create a lifestyle that's going to support this. I have to start thinking about like the quality of what I'm putting into my body. I have to start thinking about how much I'm putting into my body. And that's actually when my academic interest moved from more like, I was interested in econ and finance and all that. I actually moved a lot more to physiology, biology. I said, well, okay, like I'm kind of my first project. This is a really interesting application of science, and got very much into it at that time. So that's when I discovered weight training, actually looking at like old school powerlifting videos, seeing what was possible. That's what got me interested in powerlifting, and that's where I started out.
What was the exercise when you were losing weight?
Almost nothing. I was literally just doing 20 to 30 minutes of stationary bike a day, and maybe the occasional push-up.
True.
There was...
As someone who's been there, or similar place, similar landscape, was that a difficult transition for you? Like you kind of create this identity around being the lean, skinny, small guy.
Exactly.
And now you've decided you want this thing, but it's kind of directly opposing this new identity that you've created for yourself.
Yep.
Or was there a light switch moment like there was with losing weight? You were just like, no, this is what I'm doing.
That's actually a really good point, because it was a case of identity where I thought, and it's funny how your brain works, because anyone who's been in any sport or any physical activity for any length of time, and certainly looks at themselves in the mirror, like you immediately see how much further you have to go, and you see what you're still capable of. And I was thinking that when I was losing weight, I was thinking I could always be leaner. I could always lose a little bit more. I'm going to be the best at this. Anybody who doesn't do this is lazy. And that was a big thought at the time, was if somebody is not following the same lifestyle I am, it's because they're lazy. When I finally broke that mindset, I kind of applied similar idea. Like, my identity was not just about being lean. I convinced myself that my identity was just being able to make my body do what I wanted it to, and to have an objective and say, okay, I set this goal for myself. I did it well. This is not the goal I want for myself.
True.
My identity is being in a person who executes what he says he's going to do, not just in a person who loses as much weight as possible.
And I don't mean this in an insensitive way or to like kind of dramatized or gratify, you know, what you went through, but do you think it was almost a gift in a way where, like you said, you were eating like 400 calories a day, doing the exercise bike every single day? That is not easy to do. Like the determination, the work ethic that is required. Do you think that maybe that gave you a leveled up your work ethic? Sure, the work was applied to the wrong thing. We can probably all agree that. But that same work ethic is probably here now in this next journey where you're like, well, this is hard, but it's easy compared to that, I presume.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of people I've talked to who, even in the athletic space, do super restrictive diets and all that. These are, and, you know, even talking about people who have, you know, various eating disorders and the like, these tend to be high achievers. This is definitely a high achievement mindset. It's a mindset that says, I'm not going to be second best at anything. Or in this case, this is something I can be good at that is just for me. And I'll think a lot of that mindset is really there for a lot of athletes. It's there for a lot of athletes, you know, as they talk about things with athletes with orthorexia and exercise addiction and things like that. I think a lot of it comes from the same place. It's this idea that here's a goal I've set for myself. Here's an image, a persona I've set for myself. I'm going to be the best person at this. Nobody can take this away from me. My success or failure depends on what I do, not just when nobody's looking, but even if nobody else approves of it.
True. And when you're dealing with these high level endurance athletes, do you think that, I'm not going to say inbuilt because it is built by them, I'm sure to some degree, but is there a certain steel or resiliency that those top level performers have that maybe is what helps separate them from the people who are floating in the pack behind?
Oh yeah. And you know, I'm certainly not going to mention any names, but I know a lot of high level endurance athletes, especially ultra endurance athletes, who have various very diagnosable psychological, I don't want to say disorders, but psychological issues that they deal with, you know, ranging from certain kinds of obsession to, you know, certain depressive episodes, like a lot of things. Because I think a lot of these individuals, fundamentally, they are people who aren't afraid to suffer. They're people who aren't afraid to put themselves through the ringer for what they believe is a goal that they really want. There's a certain almost, I wouldn't say like nihilistic, but it's this idea that, hey, it doesn't matter if this hurts. It doesn't matter if this breaks me down a little bit. This is something I want to achieve. This is something I can suffer through. And you really do see it. You see it in a lot of ultra endurance athletes. You see it in strength sports too. I mean, you see a lot of people who are just, they've been injured, they've been torn to pieces, and they keep after it because their identity is their sport, but their identity is also in their grit, in their determination, in their fearlessness, in their willingness to deal with pain, discomfort, sometimes, you know, loss of other things in life. And I think with a lot of high level athletes, and I certainly never consider myself a high level athlete, but somebody who has had a bit of that mindset, I think it's all in how you direct that.
True.
So with going back to with you in college and kind of making that shift and that pivot based upon identity. Yeah. Identity shaped internally and externally, right? So when you felt that you were too small or too weak or whatever, compared to what? Like, what's the comparison that you're using for that?
Yeah, it's, you know, the thing is my point of comparison at some point was, first of all, it's who I was before. And I realized when I played sports in high school, I just felt capable. And I just felt like I could do a little bit of everything. I wanted to run, I could run. I wanted to pick up something heavy, I could pick up something heavy. I think just feeling physically capable was something I'd always felt in my life. Like, I wasn't the greatest at anything, but there wasn't anything I couldn't really do. And feeling that suddenly, like, I was feeling like I had to ask somebody else to open jars for me sort of mindset. You know, that moment when you realize that this is something you used to be good at and you're no longer the best one in the room. You might possibly be the worst one in the room at it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it was, that was one of those moments that hit me when I realized in my friend group, suddenly I was the smallest person there.
True.
And I was thinking, I'm physically the least capable of all of them. That is not something I ever thought I would be.
This might be a bit of a deep question in a way, but do you think your whole endeavor towards the hybrid athlete approach, which we'll discuss, is that you trying to reclaim that feeling that you had when you were this multi-sport athlete, where it's like, I'm at the drop of a hat, I am capable of doing almost anything? Is it kind of that endeavor, like I want to reclaim that feeling, that confidence?
That's a big part of it. It was this idea that I got strong. When I started lifting again, I got strong. I felt good. I felt capable. I got challenged to do a 5K. And I always say my first training run, which is supposed to be just a 3-mile easy jog with a couple friends, became a 400-meter sprint. It was at about an 11-minute per mile pace. And my right calf cramped. It didn't really cramp. I told everyone it cramped. And I sat down and I realized I am just really bad at this. And there was a lot of this thought that I love strength sport. I love being strong. I love actually being able to lift weights that most people think are freakish. Not in strength athlete world, but according to the average person. But then there were other areas where I just felt like I was suffering, like I wasn't working up to my potential in them. And I thought initially when I got into strength sport, I had to give those up. I thought I can't do cardio anymore. That's not part of the strength athlete identity. And then the other part of me said, well, maybe it could be. Nobody else seems to really want to do it. And there are people now who are doing it all the time, but this was back in, 2003, 2004, when everything was pretty siloed. There was no one else really doing it at the time. I would go to a bike race and I would be the one that, was twice the size of everyone else there. And they thought I was going to eat all their food. Like that was the kind of perception. I was this ridiculous looking big figure next to a lot of smaller athletes. And, that was part of my thinking was maybe, just maybe, I didn't actually have to give this up. Maybe I can find a way to actually kind of reclaim some of that capability, this feeling of being able to do whatever I wanted, and also be healthier at the same time, do all these things while still enjoying and seeing myself primarily as a strength athlete.
So at what point throughout all this were you exposed to just basic periodization, right? Because up until this, you're just doing stuff to do stuff, right? I'm going to go run. I'm going to go lift. And what was the catalyst that made you think, I want to become better at this? And then you start falling into periodization models, because you have the strength models, and there's models that apply to endurance and stuff like that too, where that's a big turning point for most people. Never hit that. They never get exposed to that. They just exercise, right?
Well, one of my biggest influences early on in strength sport and strength training was actually looking at a lot of West Side's material. And then I started reading SIF. I started reading like Zatsiorski and all of that, and really looking at a lot of that material. And one of the real breakthroughs actually for hybrid training was being able to look at conjugate periodization and look at how the various parameters of athleticism are broken down. The parameters of sport performance. A heavy lift is not just a heavy lift. You don't just do the heavy lift over and over again. There are a lot of physical components to it. There's a lot of, max effort, dynamic effort, speed, explosiveness, form, skill components. It's really breaking everything down and saying, we don't have to train every single aspect of a competitive lift on every single session. We can break this down. We can break a lift down into multiple different smaller movements, into multiple different performance parameters, and we can work on some of these independently. And it was taking a similar approach to running. And that was kind of the breakthrough in a lot of this, because a lot of the strength training I was doing at that time was following basic conjugate programming. And a lot of that was, wasn't conventional block periodization at the time either. Like I was just doing continuous. And when I started running, I started following, the standard programs that you would get from, any sort of website that's like, here's a couch to 5K program.
Now, were those just stacked on top of the other?
They were just stacked on top of it. And one of the interesting things is when you're running like a conjugate type lifting program, you're carefully controlling a lot of the recovery components every single week. Like you're adjusting, you're letting this recover while you're working on that. You're focusing on this element while letting this element take a break. But in these running programs, you're just stacking volume and stacking volume and stacking volume and stacking volume, and then dropping to deload or to like after your event and stacking volume. And so what was happening was it was more of a linear / block periodization stacked on top of like a conjugate type program. And I would feel great for about 5 or 6 weeks of the training, and then everything would just blow up.
So in that effort, you know, you've got your conjugate set up over here with your lifting. So what does conjugate running look like then? Well, how is it different to that traditional volume taper approach?
Well, a lot of that was realizing, first of all, that running can almost be approached the same way. And you hear a lot more about this now. You hear a lot more about people doing like their speed work and their speed sessions, their track sessions, their sub-threshold sessions, their base work and all that. Like that's a lot more common. One of the things I got away from initially was this idea that progressing in a running program means just running further or, you know, running a little bit faster every time. So I started approaching running in a lot of ways like weight training, like using interval length and duration and intensity as its own sort of parameter. You go from 4-minute intervals to 6-minute intervals to 8-minute intervals. You adjust the threshold, you adjust the percentage of your running pace, like of your running threshold, the same way you adjust the percentage of your lifting weights. You do your max effort / speed work on the running. You know, you do your plyometric work, you do your base work, you know, your volume work. By breaking those components up and by arranging those like within the training cycle to sort of supplement the strength training, because that was a part of the early hybrid athlete development, was thinking, okay, I have these different components. I have every single conjugate lifting session has its own set of stressors, its own psychological stressors. You come into it, you know you're going to lift something heavy as hell that day. You're in a certain mindset. There's a certain amount of fatigue that every session is going to impart. There's a certain amount of excess recovery that each session might have. You do the same thing with the running and you look to see, okay, right after a max effort lower body session, max effort squat session, like what am I physically capable of doing on the running side? Mm-hmm. Can I still do some limited speed and explosive work afterwards, or am I too gassed out? Do I need to just do a little bit of low intensity volume work right after that? Now, if I'm doing like, you know, dynamic effort upper body work on a given day, given percentage, given intensity, what can I do on the running side on that day? It doesn't have to be necessarily like the optimal thing to do, but what quality work can I still do on that day? What quality work do I have in me after that weight training session that I can do on the running side of things?
Now, at that time when you're going down those rabbit holes, I want to dig into what running actually means a little bit. Mm-hmm. When you're going down that rabbit hole, I'm going to assume that you were being exposed to Charlie Francis's work and to other speed coaches, mm-hmm. right?
Yep.
But that doesn't fall. That would be sprinting, right?
Yep.
And when you say running, are we speaking long distance and then ultras? That's where the gap was.
That's where the gap was. Yep.
And that's where everything was just this linear, just keep putting miles in.
Exactly.
Until you break.
Exactly.
Deload and then hopefully peak it again.
Yeah. Because, you know, I think sprint training was looked at very differently. And sprint training has always had much more of a lifting focused, you know, sort of, it's very much about sport performance and sport parameters and like looking at different ways of getting mechanical improvements to the movements and so on and so forth. But commercial running in the US, especially 20 years ago, there were some great marathon coaches out then. Excuse me. But for the most part, a lot of programs that the average person would have access to were very, very simple. Mm-hmm. And I think and one of the big things with hybrid training was you kind of have to approach every sport that you do, running, cycling, powerlifting, weightlifting, whatever, as an elite athlete would approach it. You have to understand what the critical components of sport performance are so that you can focus on those in order of priority and not just throw in work for the sake of work. Because a lot of these running programs, you want to do a couch to 5K program or a couch to marathon program for somebody, you can just throw a little bit of extra volume at them every week. And if you do it slowly enough, they're going to improve. Same thing with a weight training program. You take somebody who's never lifted before in their life, and you can just throw a, you know, conventional, you know, 4 different lifts, 8 to 10 reps, 3 sets of everything, 4 days a week. They're going to make improvements to a certain point. The more things you want to combine, the more different sport parameters you want to combine, the more different kinds of athleticism you want to combine and progress concurrently in, you need to really dial down those critical sessions, those critical components of sport performance, and figure out how to mix and match those throughout the training cycle to let the athlete actually trigger a sufficient stimulus for adaptation in every single session.
Let's define the hybrid thing, because when you first came out with the book 2012, 2014, I think I had a pretty good understanding of what it is. You know, pick a couple things, couple them together, you know, train them until you're satisfied with doing those, and then piece together a couple other ones.
That's
right.
A better description than 99% of the descriptions I see out there now.
But that's what I was going to say. Now I don't know what it is, you know, because when I look at it now, it's like, well, you have to be jacked. Yeah. You know, it's like, that's not kind of what you were talking about. And you coined this, right? So this is your thing, right? I'll say it, you might not, but you're the first one to come up with that name, I believe, because you had a timeline and it was the best sounding thing that you could come up with.
That was exactly it. It's like, what do you want to call this? I was, hybrid. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Part of the reason why you have the new book coming out is to better define this. Yes. But for my own purposes and for us discussing this moving forward, like, how do you define that now? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
And what is it? Wait, well, first, what is it not?
What is it not? Hybrid training is not just lifting and running. Hybrid training is not competing in hybrid races, which there are a couple others now. There's no such thing as hybrid.
Staying hydrated is huge for training and performance. And this is why today's episode is brought to you by Element. Element gives you exactly what your body needs: 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, 60 milligrams of magnesium, 0 sugar, and no junk. Personally, I like to mix half a pack with my morning oatmeal. I'll use any of the chocolate flavors. I drink it with all my training sessions, watermelon being my favorite. Some other reasons why I use it is stable energy with no crash. It fights off fatigue and cramps, improves mental focus and clarity, helps regulate stress, and supports deeper sleep. And there's no sugar and garbage. Here's the best part. You can try it totally risk-free. Right now, Element is offering a free 8-count sample pack of its most popular flavors. With each purchase, you get 2 of each of these 4 fan favorites, perfect for finding your own favorite or sharing with a friend. Don't like it? Give it to a salty friend and Element will give you your money back. Head over to www.drinklmnt.com/table talk.
Sport.
Well, wouldn't that, I got to say this, if there's a hybrid race, wouldn't that not be hybrid?
Precisely. Precisely.
Definitionally, right?
Precisely, because the whole idea behind hybrid is that if you're training in 2 or more different sports, your performance in one, your standing in one, doesn't care about your standing in the other. That's exactly the point. If I'm competing in marathons and I'm competing in powerlifting, my marathon placing doesn't come with a little line next to it where I can write my powerlifting total to excuse the fact that I didn't do well. They don't care. Mm-hmm. That's the essence of hybrid. So a single sport that claims to be hybrid, look, there are some great sports out there under the guise of hybrid sport. Like, they're fantastic. They're great challenges. I love the fact that they're training. They're getting people to train multiple sport parameters. I think that's fantastic. But I would say they're not inherently hybrid because at the end of the day, there's one score, and that is your final time. And every bit of training you do, because central to hybrid programming is sitting down on beginning of every single week, looking at your programming for the week and thinking with every single session, okay, if I do this session for this one sport, am I still going to be able to hit the critical sessions to improve in my other sport? Mm-hmm. And that is it. Like, you have to think about compromise. You have to think about your week. You have to think about the fact that I am stacking together 2 or more different activities that don't explicitly support each other. So I have to make that decision every time I go out there. I've got this limited bucket of recovery resources. I have to use those in the best way possible to improve in a bunch of different sports that don't care about each other.
See, I've always seen it as stacking together 2. Mm-hmm. Like, the or more is where I would start to get confused, mm-hmm. right? Because, how do I want to say it? If you put 2 together, it's a reality. The reality that you're not going to be the all-time best in either one of those 2. My counter to that is, what makes you think you're going to be the all-time best if you just specify in one?
Exactly.
You might be lucky to be in the top 20%. So if you're going to be in the top 20%, you can do it in multiple disciplines.
Right.
And don't use it as an excuse as, well, I'm doing this, that's why I can't be in the top 100% of the other. That's kind of bullshit. Yep. So the more that you would stack on that, the more that threshold would decrease. Mm-hmm. Actually, you're going to run out of time.
Yeah, exactly. You are. And I think that's honestly a big aspect to it. Like, let's just say, like, the 3 things I love doing right now is I love lifting, I love trail running, and I love cycling. And, yeah, I can run and cycle them together, and that's a triathlon. But at the end of the day, like, there are some overlaps between running and cycling, but there's also a lot of conflict between the two if you want to be like great at both. There's a reason why you have very fast runners as triathletes, but the top triathletes in the world, yeah, if they specialize for a couple of years, they may do very well in, like, say, running events or cycling events, but they're not at that moment completely crushing it, because there is some, cycling has its own, has its own form, has its own movement economy. Running has its own, there's a certain time investment you need in each sport to be the best at it. And if you're going to be doing running and cycling, you're not spending enough time in each one to be the best at it, because you run out of time. So when you start getting to 3 activities or even 4 activities, like let's say I wanted to do Olympic weightlifting as well. Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting, they can go together in some ways, but there's still going to be conflict. You need to spend a lot of time on the Olympic lift. You need to spend a lot of time on patterning, on work, on form improvement and the like. A little bit less time, like actually on the heavy squat. Your form is going to be different for each. So those things, yeah, you do. You reduce your ceiling a little bit on all of them. But again, the idea of hybrid training is, okay, they don't all have to collapse. If you have one that you really love doing, you can train these other 3 and still focus on your primary sport or sports and continue to improve in those while improving the other. It's sort of the idea is, yeah, you can do a hybrid program where, like, I'm like, yeah, I really want to continue peaking for a powerlifting meet this year. I'm still going to be running marathons. If I get my best ever total this year, I might not qualify for Boston this year. And that's okay. But the idea is still being able to do it in such a way that you're optimizing, as much as I hate that word, optimizing your progress in all of them.
So I got, let me jump into this. Let me jump in. So with your timeline of putting this content out, so you have 3 or 4 years of just writing articles, kind of like under the radar, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the book, and it's still kind of under the radar, but then like a year or 2 after the book, it pops.
Yep.
Now you're on the radar, right? A lot of the backlash that you would have received is kind of being countered because you're jacked, right? So they can't sit there and say it's going to screw up your gains. You're deadlifting 700 pounds.
Right.
What was it? Some of the backlash was kind of, because I remember all this, right? Some of the but there still was a lot. Mm-hmm. So what was the biggest criticisms when it popped?
The biggest criticisms were effectively that, yeah, you're not going to be great at everything, and that I think that was some of the biggest pushback as well, is people saying you're never going to be an elite at any one of these. You'll never live up to your potential in any sport as long as you do this.
Your Facebook debates were amazing, by the way.
What's that?
Your Facebook debates with people were amazing, by the way, because they would say some snarky, shitty ass thing, and you're a very intelligent person. And this is when the trolling was actually really good trolling.
Oh, it was.
You had this way to just keep them going, and then hit them with this other post where they just look completely stupid.
Yeah, because you get them to double down on yeah. Well, because I think that was a big thing, though, was this whole idea of like, well, you're still like, there's still like loads of, you're not, no one's going to do this, because you're basically telling them they could be better if they didn't do multiple different things. Like, we have people who are obligate powerlifters or obligate runners saying, if I do this, I'm just not going to be as good as I could be at my main sport. So why would I do this? This is dumb. Like, maybe a couple people can succeed on this, but for the most part, it's kind of pointless. You're not going to be the best you're going to be. So why would you ever want to do this?
That still brings up my question of what makes you think that you're going to be that good in the first place, because there is still only the top 10%, no matter how you boil it down.
I think that's kind of it. And that's, I think a lot of people, I think the first time they try any sort of like new sport, or they try to add something to what they're doing, and they realize that their performance in their main one suffers for a while. Because that's what happened to me. I started training for my first marathon, and my lifting just went to crap.
Now, were you still just stacking on top of everything? I was still just
stacking.
Okay.
And I think that's what happens, because like fatigue masks fitness.
Sure.
Every session you go in, you're a little bit more tired. You're going to see your lifts tank a little bit. It takes some time for your body to get used to it.
Well, in fairness too, there was not any education out there to help guide through this.
None.
So you had to cut a path.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, they just saw, if they gave it a try, they saw that initial downturn and said, look, man, I'm losing 10% off my total here. Like, what is the point of this? And the whole argument is, yeah, you're losing that much off your total right now because you're just stacking stuff, and you're not giving yourself time to find a program that works. Because my other counter to that is also, as much as I hate to say it, like, you may not always be in a position in your life where that main sport is still always going to be there for you. Mm-hmm. as much as I hate to say it, like life takes things from you sometimes. Like, God forbid, sometimes it takes, it can take health from you. You can wind up with injuries. You can wind up in a different life situation, financial situation. You get bad news from your doctor about your blood lipids, and they say you need to make a lifestyle change. At some point in your life, you're going to say, all right, I might have to change my focus a little bit. And so my whole thing was, you've got a lot of people recreationally specializing in things that they're never going to get rich doing. And like you said, they're never going to be top 1% in the world anyway. And
what was the criticism from the endurance side?
A lot of them just felt that the lifting that they did was plenty, and that, any extra lifting that they did was just going to make them slower. There was no reason to lift heavy. If any runner decides to go be a power lifter, the biggest thing, honestly, was a lot of endurance athletes said, well, that sport, it's not for me. It's not for me, which implies that they don't want to do it, but it's not for me. Like, lifting heavy isn't something that endurance athletes could do. Mm-hmm. It wasn't something they were ever meant to be good at. There was a whole idea of people thinking, no, I'm just a slow twitch athlete, which, I mean, for the most part, I think a lot of us are a lot more versatile in that respect than we'd ever give ourselves credit for. So there was a lot of internal resistance for it. Like, I don't like the gym mindset. I don't like the gym atmosphere. Oh yeah, that's a bunch of big muscle heads in there throwing plates around, and that's not my vibe. That's not my environment. So a lot of it was, there was a lot of cultural resistance to it too.
Well, it was kicked off through the Juggernaut, right?
Yeah.
Which that is their demographic. Yeah. Right. So you would expect that backlash coming from that demographic, because that's the majority of all that.
Yeah.
But at a certain point in time, it exceeded that.
Yeah.
Then it fell into those other communities. That's why I asked what was the backlash from the endurance side.
Yeah.
Because it would be different if it was launched through whatever endurance, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
Through at that time frame. What did you have that I cut you off?
No, it's fine. My question is, where do you think that polarizing mindset comes from, right? Because you're a kid, you've got a teenage athlete yourself as a parent or whatever, we would probably, you've already said it about being varied. And, if you said to most parents, would you want your teenager to lift some weights and play a couple of different sports and run and cycle? You go, well, hell yeah.
Yeah.
As opposed to like, would you want your kid to just lift or just cycle? But then, so why as adults do you think we then see that all of a sudden is a really bad thing?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of it is falling into this identity. Because I think a lot of people, when they're kids, you've got team sports, the kids don't really have an identity yet. And I think in a lot of ways, you get a lot of them specializing early. I want to be a baseball player. That's all they do. They play baseball. But the parents are still like, hey, keep trying stuff, try new stuff. I think as adults get older and their free time gets smaller and smaller, a lot of times they fall into sports, they fall into exercise, they fall into recreational activity because it fits their lifestyle or it fits their identity. Like when I was in corporate, when I first started training, I wasn't coaching full time. I worked corporate for a while. I worked in pharma. I worked in clinical trial management. I worked in consulting briefly. Everybody there were triathletes. Mm-hmm. I mean, like that was kind of the thing. And like there would be group cycling events on the weekends. That was that crowd. That was that identity. And I think a lot of people, when they get older, think that their personality it's almost like a search for personality. They find a sport where they're like, yeah, that fits me. That fits my self-image. And trying something different, I don't think they like it. Mm-hmm. I think they, you get people who've just lived in the gym their whole life. They don't like the idea of going outside and going for a long run. They might find that they love it, but it's a different crowd. It's a different language. Every sport talks differently. Every sport has its own like inside jokes that people feel out-group on. I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of self-sorting based on identity and based on people just not having all the time in the world. Yeah. So they think, all right, I've got my 3 hours a week to look after myself. I'm just going to run each day. That's what I do. Getting to the gym takes too much time. I'm not going to try to pull that into what I do, even if they know, or even if you know after the fact that they would have a good time doing it and be healthier for it.
Well, we're all inherently resistant to change.
Yeah.
Right? Which is kind of ironic because growth comes from change.
Yeah.
So in the weight room, you grow from failure and, stuff like that. And same with the training. So we become resistant to that, but it messes with your head when you really start to dig down into it, because then you realize all big things have happened because of that change, and you should look forward to it and lean into it instead of away from it.
Yeah.
but you can get caught up in the social cycles, those social networks to where that's all there. So now it's not just this internal change, but there's a societal external change. Like, well, if I do this, all of them are going to say, what are you doing?
Right.
Now you're an outcast. So you got to be okay.
Yeah.
Being the outcast.
Yeah.
Right. And perpetually always kind of live as the outcast. And that's, tries to theorize why a lot of the outcasts end up becoming very successful later in life, because they're like, hey, I lived this way my whole life.
And that's, yeah. And there's something tough when you get older about putting on the white belt every single time. I think as you get older, especially as you get successful, it's very difficult to be in a stage where you try something and you realize you're just terrible at it and you've got to start from scratch. Like, I think, a lot of us, we get to a certain level of proficiency. There's comfort in proficiency. There's comfort in familiarity. And trying a brand new activity, be it like if you're a successful person, you got a successful job, you got a family, you got one sport you've done for 15 years, you feel like you're pretty solid at it. Walking into a room where you know nothing about it and you're like, moving like a baby deer, that's unsettling, I think, for a lot of people. It's realizing, wow, it's going to take me 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of hard work just to feel like I belong here. And I think a lot of people, like I said, later in life, there's resistance to that. Like you said, people are afraid of change. And people don't like putting on that white belt, which
it's going to get put on them anyhow. This is kind of like the message I've been trying to spread my whole career in this industry is you're going to have the white belt anyhow. Yeah. Because if all these things are not easy, but what am I looking for? Complacent. Somebody's going to get sick. Yeah. You're going to break a leg.
Yes.
Something's going to happen, and guess what? Here's the white belt.
Exactly.
Right. So it's not that people don't know how to put it on, because it happens to them all the time anyhow. Yeah. They just need to learn how to voluntarily put it on. Yeah. Right. To be able to increase their strength and being able to deal with it when it isn't something that they choose. It's going to happen.
It is. Life does it to you.
It's life, right? Yeah. That kind of plays into that whole thing. And I know what can be taken from the strength world, with that. There's a lot of things you can take from the weight room and apply to life. One of the things that doesn't apply very well is the selfishness. That doesn't apply very well. Yeah. What are the things from the endurance side would apply that would not apply from, say, that strength side? Because just on the straining part, there's two different types of straining. There's that pain, and then there's a whole different kind of pain. Yeah. On there. Yeah. So what is some of those? And then we'll get in with because see, the hybrid, if we're looking at it from the mental perspective, here are the things from the weight room that can apply. Yeah. But a lot of things from the endurance world aren't going to be found in the weight room. Yeah. So what are those things?
I think, and what's funny is I think there's possibly more overlap than people will sometimes give it credit for. Because a lot of things in endurance training is, first of all, like the one thing I tell people, and this, you wouldn't know this from looking at like a lot of social media runners, but for the most part, and the same holds true in the weight room, but especially so when you're out there running by yourself, is the one thing I always tell people: nobody cares. And when I say nobody cares, I mean like nobody is going to know when you show up on meet day or on race day or whatever else, how many training sessions you skipped, how much you sandbagged. If you went home when you should have done, whether it's another set or you should have done another 5 miles, or if you slept in rather than doing your morning run, or if you skipped your speed work that week or anything else, nobody cares. And endurance training being it's not just such a volume related activity, but it's an activity where there is such a heavy component of putting in the work, and the majority of the work is incredibly boring. Like it's, even in the weight room, your accessory work, the boring stuff will last 15 to 20 minutes. Like that's sometimes lasts a little bit longer, but 15, 20 minutes of doing the boring stuff a couple times a week, and you're probably doing better than 90% of people who lift. In endurance training, the boring stuff is going to be the vast majority of it. It's going out and doing those like almost meaningless, like 6, 8, 10 mile runs, or going out and doing that, 3.5 hour ride where you're not doing any intervals. You're just putting in the time, you're putting in the clock. There is a lot of that. And there's a lot of this whole idea of just very, very low level suffering. It's not this acute pain. It's not, okay, I've just got to grit my teeth for another 15 seconds and get through this. It's wow, nothing feels really great right now. I feel tired. I got a little ache in my legs, and I've still got another hour and a half to go. And I've just got to deal with that. Or if you're an ultra endurance athlete and you're thinking the race starts at mile 60, And I know at that point, I've got another 40 miles. I've wanted to quit 30 times by now, and I've still got another 8 hours out here. I think there's a real mindset that goes along with that, where, you know, you realize that, and here's another thing in endurance programs, and especially like looking at things like ultras, one thing I think is really unique to that mindset. Most people are going to be impressed by any distance you do. You know, if you're doing this for external validation, you'd be like, I ran 30 miles. Look, wow. You go, I ran 50 miles. Wow. It's a little bit like the elite level of strength sport. Like, you talk to people who don't know strength sport, they don't know the difference between a 900-pound squat and a 650-pound squat. They think both are incredible.
Or 400-pound squat.
Yeah, they have no basis for comparison. They think, oh yeah, you squat a lot. You know, like you're an 800-pound squatter. And someone says, oh yeah, I know somebody who, like, in my gym, who lifts a lot. Yeah, he's got like 4 plates on each side. He's a big squatter. And you're going, oh, okay, hey, that's great. It's, you know, to endurance sport, it's kind of the same thing. Like, people don't have a frame of reference for what it takes to run 100 versus run a 50 or run a 30 or anything else. Like, so a lot of this is very self-driven. If you're doing this for external validation, granted, you know, social media being what it is, if you're doing this for external validation, you're not going to last long in the sport. And there is especially, like I said, with endurance training, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of internal drive, a willingness to tolerate low-level suffering, to do really, really, really boring work when nobody is watching and there's almost no visible payoff.
With the statement of nobody cares, because I agree with that, but there's this very small part that I don't. And where I don't agree with that would be if it is the competitor at the higher level. Oh yeah. Their competitors care. Yeah. Because they want to beat them. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So a lot of, with that mental stuff at this level, a lot of that drive can be enhanced by knowing that the person you're going to compete against is not going easy. Yeah. You know, they're training smart. I mean, going hard is kind of irrelevant, right? Because you can go too hard and burn out. Yeah. But there is that. So there is that perception, because they really don't care. Like, if you don't show up, they're happy. Yeah, exactly. So it's the fact is still true. Yeah. But the driving force could be amplified with that. Yeah. You know, and that becomes this weird paradox to when they no longer compete. Some of that drive will just dissipate. Yeah. Because that drive was too focused on what the other people were going to think. Yeah. Right. So then they're in this position to where it's just them and they don't know what to do. Yeah. Because a lot of that was misplaced, especially during the more competitive time. I think this is part of the reason why they deal with this identity crisis. Any athlete, after they competing for a high level, then they're no longer competing. Right. You know, they're used to all the fake attention, right? A lot of it is perceived, you know, because they think they're more important than they really are, right? Yeah. But then they don't know what to do. They don't know how to train. You know, we see this with powerlifters that retire and go into jiu-jitsu or, you know, try to do ultras or whatever it's going to be, because they're just kind of like looking for that, but not realizing it's all that internal that they were doing this whole time. Yeah. You know, you've always done the accessories. You've always done, you know, those miles that you're talking about that you just have to do, that nobody really wants to do. You just get used to doing it. Yep. So it becomes this weird thing, you know, to observe. Yeah. Especially as we get older, you can see it. You can see the bell curve happening in people. It's like, they're almost there. Okay, right there. They're in that window now. Yeah. And then you just watch, you know, 5, 6, 7 years later, boom, now they're in this other window. They don't know what to do anymore. Yeah. Are they going to make it? Are they not going to make it? Are they just going to sit on the couch and drink beers? Are they done? Yeah. You know, what's it going to be? Oh, okay, there, they made it. You know, it's interesting to watch. There's been one interesting phenomenon I've seen too, and that's been like athletes who do, like, people used to be kind of the top of their game, but get too caught up too in like the perceived popularity contest. And you do see this, you know, I don't want to go into the whole, like, you know, old guy ranting about social media, but it is kind of like the, you know, the Instagram workout where everybody thinks I need to be showing people highlight reels. I need to be showing people, because their brain starts thinking that their training needs to be highlight reels. And that thought that every time you walk into the weight room, every time you go out on the trail or track or whatever else, you got to be doing a highlight reel. That is a absolute death to progress. And, you know, I said, I think in endurance sport, it's usually a little easier to stay away from that because the majority of the stuff that you do is boring, but it's also then easier
if you lose that drive and you lose that competitive side of it, it's a lot easier to stop doing the non-highlight reel work because it's boring in your brain too.
Since we're talking about the mentality of a hybrid approach, you kind of hinted at how your definition of a hybrid athlete is different to what might be popular, CrossFit, High Rocks. And I'm not saying they're good or bad in any way, but you mentioned that it involves going after endeavors that will take away from each other. Like you're going to have to admit that, the meet where you deadlift 750 or whatever is not going to be 3 months later running your best marathon time. Right. Whereas if I'm a CrossFit athlete, for example, I can say I like the weightlifting part a bit too much. I can just focus on that and I can still maybe get away with that. Because if I do really well in the weightlifting event, but I hate the running, I maybe can make up for it. Whereas what you're talking about is you can't get away with your own bullshit, excuse the French, but like there has to be a sacrifice, right? So to you then is almost that sacrifice and that maturity that has to be created to make that kind of what is different about it?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really big part of it, because when you're training for separate events, you have to, again, white belt, you have to put on the white belt when you start this new activity that you're doing. You have to treat each activity that you're doing with utmost respect. And because you can't, if you're doing your running event separately from your lifting event, you can't, like you were just saying, you can't kind of get around a poor running training cycle by lifting a whole bunch. That's not going to happen. You're going to show up, and what you put into each activity, the amount you respected each activity, and the intelligence of your training, honestly, is going to determine your final result. There's nowhere to hide. And that's part of the fun of it too, though. Is part of the challenge, and part of the challenge has always been for me is I'm much bigger than the average cyclist. Like I go up a climb and I look at, I do a couple of local climbs where I am in Idaho, and there's one bogus basin. It's like a 14 mile in length, and it's about 3,700 feet of gain. And I look at some of the other cyclists out there who do the climb like 45 minutes faster than I do. And I look at their wattage output, and I'm putting down like 100 more watts than they are for the entire thing. Now, obviously I'm bigger. I got more strength and everything else, but I'm looking at that. I'm going, okay, that's not an excuse. I'm not going, well, yeah, but what can you bench? But okay, maybe I do that internally a couple times, but like I try to do that as little as possible. Like as they pass me, I'm like, yo, can you bench? But there's still this thought that nobody who's looking at any one of these leaderboards is going, oh yeah, but he's really strong. Yeah, they're just going, he's got a lot of improvement to make. And that's kind of the thing is, I know I'm never going to be the best. I know I'm never going to be the best climber. I'm 45 years old and 230 pounds. I'm not going to be beating any obligate cyclists up these climbs, but I can still do better and surprise myself if I put in the right amount of work.
Are you feeling like you're not the man you're supposed to be? Low confidence, negative thoughts polluting your brain. That's me. I get it. I've been dealing with messed up hormones most of my life. A couple years I hooked up with Merrick Health, and it was one of the best things that I ever did. They're a health optimization platform that does advanced lab works and goes deeper than probably what you've ever seen before. What you'll get with Merrick Health is they have guided optimization and the self-service diagnosis. I personally have been using the guided optimization for the whole time I've been with him. Dry is my health coach. He does an amazing job. The second route that they have is the self-service diagnostics. This is just a DIY with your own health journey. You just head over to Merrick Health, pick the panel, and they'll send you the report. You just kind of go from there. Either way, I highly recommend them, and you can get 10% off right now. Just head over to merrickhealth.com and use the code TABLETALK at checkout.
Sure. And to me, that's the exciting part. Yeah. Is like saying, okay, counter to type, but I'm having fun doing this. I'm having fun improving. I'm troubleshooting this. And the more I learn about the sport, the smarter my training gets. And I still have so much to learn that I can still improve in spite of, every year that goes by, I have a little bit less recovery to pull from.
So how do you manage and define better? Right? Because even that same course can be a different course on a different day. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So it can't just be, well, my time was better. Yeah. It might have been raining the whole freaking time. Yeah. Right? Where with a bench press, a squat, and a deadlift, if it's better.
It's better.
Here's what you weigh, here's what you lift. Yeah. So how do you go about wrapping your head around that if you're trying to get better at that thing, what metrics determine if it's better or not?
Yeah. And it varies. It varies from like, what was my average wattage on this climb, or like how was my overall mileage during this week compared to what was my average output like during this week. So there are a lot of things. And with endurance sports, it's always a lot more, like you said, it's always a little bit longer term. How I do on any one climb doesn't matter. But I'll look at like the climbs I did over the last 6 weeks compared to the climbs I did a year ago over that same 6-week period. And I look at the general trend, like, was my heart rate improving on any one of these? Even if this one was slower, was there some sign of overall improvement? And, I'm not going to know immediately, okay, am I better than I was? But if I'm like, this year overall, my output is slightly better, my heart rate's slightly lower, and I'm able to put in more mileage with less cost. Was this a better training season? Did I do something right this year? And it's, that's one of the reasons why personally I'm pretty data heavy, because my brain lies to me all the time. So, I've got my wearables, I look at my heart rate, I look at my output and all that, and I try to ground myself so I don't drive myself crazy, because, you go on a bike and, you have headwind one day, or you're running a trail and it's muddy. And so, your pace goes way, way down. It does. It lies to you. So I try to keep as many different I really try to keep the long-term perspective on things. I look at things in terms of like months of progress rather than days of progress, years of progress rather than months of progress.
So if it's one of the newer clients that you're working with, say the strength athlete that wants to move into this, and they're past the beginner phase, like they're the beginner gains, like a year into it. Yeah. They're used to being in the gym and knowing, hey, this is stronger, this is stronger, this is stronger. So with them, yes, you'll have those metrics, but I'm pretty sure they're not going to embrace all those metrics from the jump. Yeah. It's like, this is just information overload. Yeah. What do they look at in regards to if it's better or not?
Yeah. And I think just as a way to preface, I think that's why people talking about like their VO2 max now has become so popular as well, because it gives people something to look at. They're looking at their VO2 max almost like they're looking at their bench press. It's like, oh, it went up this season. But I think we know that's not the whole story. There's a lot of other things to it. A big part of getting people used to endurance sport is really driving home that this is a long-term lifetime activity. It's got a lot more akin to bodybuilding than anything else, where you're not going to see much of a change from 1 month to the next unless you're like, yeah, I've gained 30 pounds. You're like, how much muscle did you actually gain? You see progress from season to season. It's a big part of getting people who are coming from a strength mindset to an endurance mindset is getting them used to that long-term way of thinking, which in and of itself is its own part of development, is thinking, okay, there's a delayed gratification to this. When I see progress, I'm going to see progress in ways I didn't anticipate. Like I'll show them like, what is your zone 2 pace 4 months into it? And their zone 2 running pace may be 6 minutes or 6 seconds per mile faster now than it was. That's already progress. It's tiny, it's subtle, but that's how you have to envision, I think, a lot of things in endurance sport. And I think that teaching and learning to embrace that kind of delayed gratification, that slow process, honestly, that's part of why I think endurance sports could be so valuable to a lot of people, because it teaches you like there's not a shortcut. You can't, there's no even such thing like, you sometimes see people who are past the newbie phase in their strength training where they're like, hey, if I cut my squat by a 1/4 inch more every week, I can gain 5 pounds on my squat every week. You can't cut corners like that. It's just not going to happen. And obviously it doesn't happen in strength sport either. You actually get on a platform, but for the most part, you're like, there's nothing to hide behind. You have to put in the work. You have to wait. You'll see these long-term benefits, but that's also why I consider it such a, I always emphasize the health aspect of it as well. Sure. And saying like, that's a big part of why we do this as well. The big part, like most of us past a certain age, physical activity, yes, it's a source of identity. Yes, it's a source of community. It's something that keeps our brain fresh. It keeps us driven. It keeps us physically capable. But at the end of the day, it's also, when you get past 30, when you get past 40 and you get past 50, you're like, you kind of reap what you sowed your whole life. Mm-hmm. And I think reminding people as well that, hey, just because you don't necessarily see the benefit of this just yet doesn't mean your body is not actually better off for it.
I think it's interesting because Dave, you asked about life lessons for the endurance side, but to me, it sounds like being a hybrid athlete revolves around accepting that you're in a subpar situation, which you put yourself there, but still doing the best that you can anyway to strive to be better in things that are quite hard to quantify, that also take a long time to get better. It sounds a lot like life kind of in general, if you know what I mean. It sounds like you've kind of created a sport that in its entirety almost kind of represents like, well, this is probably what you should be doing all day, every day.
And I think that's it too, because if you're looking for like, how much can I progress in 3 months on a hybrid program, you might be disappointed. But if you look at yourself 2 years into a program, you might not recognize the person you were. And I think that's where a lot of the real value comes in, is taking that long-term mindset and realizing that this may, like a hybrid program may even improve people's lifting programs, because it gets them away a little bit from like the short-term, got to add weight on the bar every week, got to add weight on the bar every week. You know, it gets people thinking about the accessories. It gets people thinking, you know, kind of change them. And same thing the other way around. Like having more things to focus on keeps you focused on the long-term progress and the consistency. And I think that's valuable for so many athletes, because, you know, I've worked with people who are obligate powerlifters, they're obligate ultra endurance athletes, and they do hybrid programs. And yes, obviously there are physical benefits. You know, we could talk about the physical benefits of resistance training for endurance athletes or cardiovascular conditioning for strength athletes. That's all there. But there's also a mindset shift that seems to happen that really has a lot of athletes focused on a little bit on longevity and a little bit on saying, okay, yeah, as long as I'm heading in the right direction, I'm really paying attention to my recovery, I'm really paying attention to the quality of each session. I'm thinking about what long-term am I getting out of every session. When I look through the week, I'm thinking, okay, what are the important sessions? What are the important sessions for me as an athlete? Not necessarily what I want to do because it's, you know, because this is what I'm good at, but what is the best thing I can do on any given day to improve my performance in any given sport? And you have to be ruthless. And I think sometimes cutting out a lot of the chaff does make for better athletes. True. It's just a bit of more of a long view.
Before we get into like the benefits that you see in your athletes when they adopt this type of approach, I think before we get to what happens when they do it, a question that I have is, how do you get them to do it? Because you're, as you've already discussed, like we're fighting a cultural bias here that's pretty strong. Yeah. And, you know, it's not like you're going to turn around and say, hey, do you know that cardio is good for you? And they're going to be like, well, that's the first I've heard of it. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. We all intrinsically know. So at some point, there are going to be some people, of course, who come to you with their eyes open and want it, but there's going to be some resistance, I presume, with some of your athletes. So how do you go about creating that, the initial parts of that mindset shift and that buy-in, so they actually build that initial momentum?
Yeah. And it's, you know, again, the biases are pretty strong on both extremes, I think, you know, both in the extreme strength and extreme endurance side. And a big part in overcoming that is, you know, and it's actually funny, Dave, that you mentioned that people get the white belt put on them at various points in life, because I think a lot of times I try to emphasize that as well. And I say that like, hey, you know what, there are going to be down cycles in your training. There are going to be times in your training when you're going to have to back off a little bit. There are going to be times when we may have to return. Like the best thing for your lifting right now may be for us to move away from some of the competition lifts so heavily and work on other components of your strength. There are going to be times when we have to kind of reshape you as an athlete overall. And what we're trying to do here, the reason I'm having you do a lot of this conditioning is precisely to improve your recovery between sets, to let you do more quality work. Because one of the things I really try to point out as well is that all else being equal, a more complete athlete can do more quality work. Very, very specialized athletes usually have a critical weakness. Very specialized endurance athletes may have critical weaknesses in balance, in strength, in, you know, proprioception, all these things that we talk about. Very, very specialized strength athletes may have real issues with conditioning. You know, I used to joke, one of the things I always brought up is one of the powerlifters I worked with early on mentioned that one of the biggest breakthroughs for him was when he realized that he could put on his knee wraps without getting winded. And I was like, you know, and from a strength side, you know, that's kind of a big deal, because like when you finally get those things wrapped and you stand up and you're already breathing heavy, that's not helping your squat. And the idea of just, wait a minute, like that's actually huge. You know, I can actually get through my warm-ups, wrap up my knees, get up there and still feel fresh and still feel ready to go. I'm saying, like, by the time you actually get to the platform, you've probably done 10 to 15% more quality sets than your competitor who didn't. If you get nothing else out of this, think about it that way. And we're going to be, you know, because it's a hybrid program doesn't necessarily mean we're going to make you into the best runner you can be. It means we're going to do the most effective targeted conditioning we can do for you because we're going to be doing all the critical components of your strength training. We're going to be cutting out all the stuff that's not making you a better power lifter. And we're going to do just the endurance parts that are going to improve your specific conditioning for what we need. And so by using this kind of program, not just saying, yeah, we're just throwing 30 minutes of cardio per day, but saying we're actually breaking down your endurance performance and focusing just on those little pieces and putting them in the week where we need them, we're going to maximize your progress on the cardiovascular conditioning side of things just by doing these sessions, which can possibly and very realistically improve certain intangibles in your lifting that will benefit you in the future.
If I'm not mistaken, it sounds like the strength training is a bedrock to this whole thing, right? And then whatever else, whatever other sport kind of gets conjugated into that or coupled into that, right? So it could be the running, it could be the cycling, whatever it's going to be. Is that a fair assumption?
In a lot of cases, the reason why that typically goes that way is because I think the critical sessions on the strength training, if you are extremely fatigued going into a strength training session, there are very few strength training sessions you're going to be able to like really achieve a target stimulus from. If you're tired, if you're not moving well, if you're feeling weak, like you're probably not going to be able to coherently with any degree of proper form, proper skill, movement, skill acquisition decreases under fatigue. Your ability to retain good movement patterns decreases under fatigue. So I typically do make that the focus, but like for a lot of endurance athletes, some of their critical sessions, like, hey, I'm a 5K runner. My speed work and my threshold run every week are my two key components. Like if those suffer, I suffer as a runner, those become the priority.
Yeah.
So we structure that. So it's about this. It's more about looking at critical sessions. And I will say that strength training by nature, by the very nature of strength training, probably has more critical sessions than a lot of endurance sessions do. By that, I don't mean more important sessions again. I just mean sessions that require you be in a proper recovery state to be able to leverage.
All right. So if we move out of the people who compete, which is probably the majority of the clients that you've worked with are the ones that don't compete, right? And then what are the most popular things that are conjugated with that training? Is it the cycling? Is it the running? Is it both of those?
Yeah.
There's outliers, I'm sure. But if I was to say, what are the things that get conjugated the most in all the programs that you've ever put out? Yeah, the training, and then what?
Yeah, for most people, it is running.
Yeah.
I think just low barrier to entry. There's a lot of running events. There's a lot, it's just the idea of being outside. Rucking is actually becoming a close second now. And people who want to do just like a lot of outdoors, like trail hiking, things like that, that's actually becoming really, really big. I have a lot of people who just want to be able to go on like 3-4 hour hikes on the weekends with their family, on vacation, things like that. But I think running is the most common just because it is the easiest for people to get into. Cycling is up there, but I think there's a bigger barrier to entry there, cost, time, everything else. That's why it's primarily like people think about it as a lifting and running program. I would say.
Then how is that periodized? Is that periodized concurrently, where they're both at the same time, or there are specific blocks for, they're not competing. So are there specific blocks for each?
I try to do it as concurrently as possible, honestly, because I think for the most part, the issue with doing periodized blocks is that you fall into this issue where unless you perfectly calibrate both your lifting progress and your running progress to be the same level of accumulating fatigue, you're very unlikely to require a deload at the same time from both of them. Typically there's one, like for example, if you're on a running program where, you're accumulating fatigue over 8 to 10 weeks and, you're doing a periodization phase or you're building to it, each lifting and running each have different levels of fatigue. They have different rates of fatigue accumulation as you go through the program. If you don't deload at exactly the same time on both, then chances are continuing to perform at a high level in one is going to negate some of the benefits of the deload. But if you deload at the same time, but one of them is still in an upward trend and you're deloading prematurely, you're kind of selling the athlete short a little bit. So this idea of progressing from a lower volume, under the recovery line to slowly over the recovery line and then rebuilding, or even doing a, sort of block periodization where you're building different components on in each, that can sometimes be really, really challenging because you're looking at very different types of block periodization in each program, and they may not necessarily overlap ideally. I keep a lot of runners doing very much concurrent type programs. I don't drastically increase volume leading up to races. I've always said that a good runner is a good runner. And, if you're like a good lifter is a good lifter, if you're doing, whether you're doing a mile or a 5K or a marathon or anything else, the point of the running program is just to give you the best running program your body can handle based on your lifestyle and based on the other sports you're doing at the same time.
Have you personally played with blocks yourself? For instance, you can have that strength phase, but it may take 3 weeks for that strength to actually drop.
Yeah.
Right. That's where that endurance phase would go, where the endurance will probably drop a little bit faster than have you played around with that personally before coming up with the conjugated approach you have now?
Yeah.
And what were the downfalls from doing that?
Downfalls for that were very much the body recovers a little bit unpredictably when you do hybrid type programs. Just because, again, fatigue lingers in different areas that you may not have anticipated. When you're doing like a block strength program and you're layering on a lot of the endurance work at the same time, you're layering on some speed work, you're layering on some plyometrics, you've got a certain level of background fatigue. The rate of accumulation of visible fatigue on the lifting side, it gets a little bit blurry. It's a little bit harder to track when you're seeing performance drop-offs, when you're seeing improvements, when you're seeing signs of overreaching. Since there's that delay, there's so many more variables that you almost have to say, okay, let's just stay slightly under that recovery threshold rather than flirting too much with that line, because sometimes one component may go above that line and we may not notice it. It becomes a lot harder to track individual parameters, to track velocity, to track a lot of these things when there are a lot of other confounding factors. And so it's technically doable, but I think it's just a lot to actively track, and it's very easy to make mistakes, which is why I've always found that this more concurrent approach it's a lot more sustainable. And once you kind of get a sense of an athlete's individual recovery, how much of each kind of work they can take, you can make minute adjustments to the program as the training evolves and the athlete continues to improve.
So when you're mentioning fatigue and stuff a lot here. So my question to you is, like, as a coach or a person who is writing the program, what is your framework or your mentality related to fatigue? Because you're working with so many different energy systems and types of fatigue here. Yeah. Do you have some kind, because like most of us could look at a workout that was just lifting and be like, that's 37 work sets. Intrinsically that's probably too much. Yeah. Whereas it would be very hard for someone to look at a workout and be like, well, that's 12 work sets and this is a 5-mile run at this pace. How do I correlate some kind of universal currency of fatigue to know whether collectively that's too much?
Yeah, and it is. It's very challenging to do, because I think a lot of it is different types of athletes, depending on their background, have different tolerances for different kinds of fatigue, which is why it does tend to be so individualized. You can have someone from an endurance background who's accustomed to a certain level of background fatigue from doing a lot of work. They're accustomed to a certain level of degradation of performance, even just in daily life, because they are such frequent runners. But they may also conversely recover a lot faster from that. You look at new lifters, very experienced lifters may never experience delayed onset muscle soreness. Especially if they're on a good solid routine. People who are lifting for the first time, they may have delayed onset muscle soreness for 6 to 8 months if they're continuing to evolve in the program. Granted, for most people, it's just when they switch and it goes away quickly. But that may still be a factor that we're looking at. So a lot of times tracking fatigue with these athletes then is just realizing that, okay, we do have this 2 to 3 to 4 week sort of washout period, or wash-in period, I guess you would say, where you're saying, okay, we're going to see a degree of performance degradation here. We're going to see a slight degree of a reduction in explosive strength, reduction in power. We can see that for 24 hours after this threshold run, this athlete is unable to produce maximum force. So we say, okay, with that in mind, let's move the maximum force work away from that threshold run and move it over here. Now let's track the athlete's week-to-week progression in strength in these particular movements while we've held the running program static.
True.
And then if we're seeing improvements, now we go, okay, now we can dynamically adjust the running program for improvement. And now we track to see if the lifting program is affected. So even though this is concurrent, there's often a stepwise keep this portion static, progress this portion, or evolve this portion. And we say that hybrid programs, you evolve into a hybrid program and evolve hybrid programs as you go along. You don't necessarily just start a new program. You don't start a new block. You evolve into it, because you have to understand an athlete's capacity in one area. With all else being equal, you push this area, you look at parameters, you move some things around, and you try to optimize the program at this point. Now you push the other area as well, and you say, okay, am I making concurrent progress? Or when I push this area, did this area fall back? If that's the case, then we adjust this area a little bit and we say, okay, are we being too aggressive here? Do we need to adjust this one down? So it's almost this push and pull, this calibration, this looking at individual parameters week to week to week and understanding how you kind of, what sort of an athlete's maintenance is in each specific discipline. Because, the whole thing about progressive overload, especially for hybrid athletes, is that you don't need a novel stimulus every week to continue to trigger an trigger adaptation. You can still progress somewhat without changing a stimulus too soon. So when you're doing this kind of push and pull, the athlete's not necessarily stagnating. You may still have the athlete improving, just relatively slowly.
All right, that brings up the next programming question.
Yeah.
I come from a conjugate powerlifting background. There's many attributes we're trying to develop at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
We have the maximum effort, that attribute. Then you have the explosive force, the dynamic attribute. Then you have the hypertrophy, the repetition method. Then you have the conditioning attribute.
Mm-hmm.
And then all those kind of have to be conjugated in such a way that if the maximum strength is down, then that has to be pulled back up. But then it's like an equalizer, an old school equalizer. I'm going to date myself. Like you got to push this volume control down, this one up, to be able to kind of balance it all out.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way you're really effectively able to do that is to know what the minimal effective dose and the maximal effective doses each one is.
Yep.
Because the minimal effective dose is kind of like you're always writing that.
Yeah.
Until something's off, then you got to go to the maximum effective dose to bring up the weak point, but other things have to go down.
Yep.
So how do you go about figuring out what that minimal and what that maximal effective dose is across all those attributes?
Yeah. And that's exactly it. Because I've always said that like hybrid training is always minimum effective dose plus one on everything. And it's very much that. It's breaking down on the strength side, breaking down the attributes, on the endurance side, breaking down the attributes. How much actual what you would call speed work, which I always call like running economy, proficiency, turnover. How much threshold work do you need, which I always consider to be like the higher intensity work that's really pushing the aerobic system to its peak. And then how much of the base work do you have? And what is the minimum effective dose on each that you need just to ensure that an athlete doesn't degrade? And, often you'll see that when an athlete comes in, but I always start low. And I always start with, just your basic, like here are your 3 sessions per week. Let's take a look at the volume you've been doing up till now, and let's try to maintain that or even reduce that and see how little you need to actually continue to progress. And so the first couple of weeks of programming with a lot of athletes is truly putting them at their minimum effective dose on everything, which in very many cases is potentially less than they wanted to do. And it's, what is the minimum effective dose for a runner who's been running 40, 50 miles a week? They got on a hybrid program. I've got their first week up. They're only doing 20 miles. And I'm thinking, look, we've got one speed day, we've got one sub-threshold day, and we've got one long run. And they're going, wait, this is it? This is all I'm doing? And so I'm really looking at the volume they've been doing to progress, which, may have had some junk in it as well. But I'm saying, okay, with intelligently constructed minimal effective dose programming, are you still able to progress? Or can we at least, hold your performance steady? So it's a case when they come in, I give them a basic strength training program with, I think, just enough components to cover the bases, usually somewhat aligned with what they do. And one of the things I talk about in the book is how to quantify what they've been doing so far. And look at how many minutes of each type of work they're doing and how many productive sets that they're doing so far in lifting, and saying, okay, how can we slowly start to shift those towards what I think would be more optimal while not making any massive changes to the program?
So when you're working with these athletes initially, I'm curious now, this may be worse on the endurance side or not, when you're setting what you believe to be minimally effective dose, how far off is that compared to the athlete's opinion of where they think minimally effective dose is? And do you think that is some of the barrier to entry that you experience? Like people presume, in the same way that people presume I don't have time to exercise because I can't be in the gym 10 hours a week. Well, you don't.
Yeah.
So is that a big part of the problem that you are kind of having to battle there?
Yeah, there's a lot of that, because I think, one of the things I've always said is the minimum effective dose to maintain it can be as low as like 30% of what it takes to progress. And when it comes to running, if you're telling people, okay, now that we're doing a hybrid program, we're going to start you lifting, we're going to cut your running by 50%, they're going to look at you like you're absolutely insane.
So you find that the same with the endurance and the strength. So I agree with you on the strength. The maintenance dose for an intermediate plus is way less than what people think it is. So that's the same with the endurance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Because you could take people who've been doing 70, 80 miles a week and yeah, they're probably going to lose that last ragged 1% that only matters to elite athletes who are, measuring performance in, seconds.
Yeah, but it comes back.
Yeah. But it comes back quick. So it is very much the same way. You can really reduce volume significantly. That's what I'm saying. Like I've had runners who come in and they've been doing 9 hours of running a week, 10 hours of running a week. I introduce a lifting program, put them on a hybrid program. They may only be doing 8 hours worth of work, even with the lifting involved, because I'll have reduced the running down to a minimum effective dose to ensure that on that dose, they are still able to, at the very least, maintain while I then layer the lifting on. And I'm very carefully watching the running parameters. I'm looking at their threshold. I'm looking at their speed, looking at their average heart rates, and ensuring that over the first 4, 5, 6 weeks where they start strength training, their running is still at the very least holding steady while they start their lifting program. And then if it's holding steady, they're progressing on the lifting program, their running is holding steady, I start to push the volume on the running up a little bit more and look for signs of improvement, but also look for signs of slowdown on the lifting progress.
Do you find that can be a trick that ends up kicking them in the dick? For instance, with the strength athletes, they may have to go to that maintenance level just because life happens.
Yeah.
And then after doing that for 3 or 4 weeks, they find, oh my God, I'm breaking all kinds of PRs. Because what they kind of did was to deload like they would before meet. Yep. But then they think that maintenance mode is what did it.
Yeah.
And so they're never going to do more than that.
Yeah.
Right. So they end up with this ridiculously low volume that ends up kicking them in the dick because it's not enough to be able to build. Is that the same that you see across with the endurance?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that too, because there have been a lot of people in the endurance world who just, over the years, recreational runners who suddenly start following like lower volume, high intensity programs and going, oh my God, I'm such a better runner now than I was. I was running 80 miles a week and now I'm only doing 20 with CrossFit endurance or whatever else, something like that. And I'm a great runner. Really, it's been because of that deload focus on speed. So sometimes reintroducing that volume can be tough. But then again, a lot of people I work with are just like, they're waiting for their chance to get back out there. And, we end up usually not moving their volume quite as much. Like I've got people improving on 65 miles a week who thought they would need 80 miles a week to improve. And it's what's really interesting. And one of the things I've repeatedly found though, is that, the runners they'll usually be okay with running more. I'll probably never have them running as much as they were just because limited recovery and all that. And most people who are just runners are running up to the limits of the recovery. Same thing with a lot of people who are just, lifting however they want. They start to take enough joy and progress in the other sport that kind of scratches that itch. Because I think a lot of people who are single sport athletes have this desire to be continuously visibly improving every week. Then, yeah, there are exceptions. A lot of people think long term, but having another sport, another activity in which they can see improvement kind of, again, it scratches that itch. It's thinking, I've got 8 different things now that I'm improving in. I don't need to see every single one go up every single week. I'm suddenly finding satisfaction in things I didn't think I was going to. And it can sometimes help pull back, a little more of the obsessive type of athlete. It does, by kind of distributing and redirecting that obsessiveness a little bit.
I can see that because when I was competing, it was the number one priority, right? So the stressor is always super high.
Yeah.
And when it's not going well, nothing's going
well.
Right?
Yeah, no.
And that may be, actually, per my personal belief, that is necessary to reach the highest level you want to. But if you're not competing anymore, that's detrimental.
Yeah.
And having something else,
to
be able to, okay, this sucks, right? I guess powerlifters kind of do it because if their bench sucks, they're like, you know what, my bench just sucks right now. It's just going to be what it's going to be. I'm going to focus more on the squat and deadlift. So it will allow that pivot, which is mentally going to be easier to deal with than the other, right? The frustration I'll find sometimes is you'll have the recreational competitor, I don't know what you want to call it, that develop that same singular focus mindset that somebody would need to be at the high level competitor. It's like, for what? Then it becomes just as detrimental to them with no real trade-off. I don't know if there is one I can't say that because I'd be a hypocritical asshole. But there's a perceived trade-off, on the competitive side, for all the shit that's going to burn and fall to this wayside as you're kind of going through that. It's not real, but it's perceived, but I had it. So does everybody else. I'm not, go for it, do it. I can't be a prick or the hypocrite, but it's unnecessary if it's not competitive, to where have something anchored in there. We're going to jump off with the cardio benefits for the strength athlete.
Okay.
So what are the cardio benefits for the strength athlete?
Well, I think the first thing I was talking about, what I mentioned last time, was just the ability to recover a little bit better during the training session itself. Because I think it's obviously powerlifting is it's an anaerobic activity. You don't need a tremendously well-developed cardiovascular system, but simultaneously, I think you do. And I think if you're a strength athlete who gets too deconditioned, you don't realize necessarily what you're leaving on the table, because the recovery between sets, the mental recovery, even being able to retain your mental focus over time, brain oxygenation, heart rate responsiveness, being able to recover between sets physically and mentally as an aerobic component to it. And one of the biggest things I tell strength athletes is, no, you don't have to be a marathon runner to benefit this. You don't need a tremendous amount of conditioning to be able to recover, but you do need some. And it can't just be specific conditioning. Obviously, you want work capacity in your arms, you want the work capacity in your legs, but a more robust cardiovascular system is going to let you do more quality work over a given session, and it's going to keep you physically and mentally fresher longer into your session. So the back half of your training session isn't just going to be you at high levels of fatigue, basically trying to retain whatever consciousness you have left to get in that accessory work that you should be focusing on more, but don't. The biggest thing here is, again, you're going to get to that platform and you're going to have done 10% more quality work in the same amount of time. And you're going to be...
Dave Tate here from Elite FTS to talk to you about bands. We've been a supplier of bands for almost 2 decades now. So I've known my way around the band landscape. When I'm talking about bands, I'm talking about floss bands, long bands, short bands, bands you can use for resistance training, mobility training, body weight training, and flossing. One of our most popular bands, or actually our most popular bands, are the long bands. The long bands are typically used the most with squats, bench presses. Our floss bands are bands that you wrap around the joint to be able to help with mobility, circulation. And the short bands are designed for shorter range movements, bench press, deadlifts, and a lot of times people will use them with resistance machines to help accommodate the strength resistance curve. Head over to elitefts.com and look for bands in the toolbar or blowout menu.
Fresher. You might even be able to do a more extended proper warm-up, because every warm-up is you're improving your fitness, but there's also a fatigue component. Slightly less fatigue component to a proper warm-up means by the time you get to your top set, by the time you're warmed up and ready to go, if you have less fatigue, you're going to have a little bit more fitness when you actually get to that max set. So it's subtle. It's very much about facilitating your ability to do more of your specific targeted training.
So do you find sometimes then with these strength athletes, if they really are like a true white belt in the aerobic side of things, that even though this conditioning work gets added in, which is extra volume, that over time actually their lifting volume will then increase?
It very much can.
Yeah, even though they're trying to serve this other master over here, which is how they will see it, right?
Yeah, because in a lot of cases, it's the sort of thing where, I'll have athletes who have been doing just, basic conditioning for 6 months that said, yeah, I'm doing a couple more sets. I actually did the accessory work that you programmed for me and, didn't skip it like I've been doing every month for the first 3 months. I hear that all the time. Yeah. And, it is a case where suddenly you're doing an extra work set, you're doing an extra 2 work sets. You may even in some cases be able to increase your frequency just a little bit. It very much, it does vary, but yeah, often the volume goes up, but more importantly, the productive volume goes up. Mm-hmm. Because I think with strength sport, what's incredibly important is not just that the reps get done, but the reps get done properly, Well,
let's define conditioning work, because I'm thinking of the meathead out there, mm-hmm. right? To where what they think, what we may be speaking about, they may perceive as hard anaerobic work, which isn't really the conditioning work that we're talking about. Yeah. So how would you define the conditioning that's going to help them if they're not doing anything prior?
It's funny because when people talk about strength and conditioning is often seen as conditioning refers specifically to the athlete's ability to do more of their targeted sport training. Like conditioning is considered an essential component to sport training. So typically when conditioning is envisioned from a lifting perspective, it's the specific ability to be conditioned to do multiple sets of the target exercises. You're well conditioned for anaerobic sport. It means, you can do you start doing tire flips to improve your overall conditioning for, heavy hinge movements or whatever else you want to say. But I think critical to conditioning as well, when I refer to it, it's yes, the ability to do more sport work, but also, again, to recover between bouts of sport work, which is much more of a general systemic adaptation. So it's not just the specific conditioning of having the brain and body able to do targeted anaerobic work. It's the body's ability, it's the body having the ability to restore nutrients to the muscles, to get oxygen back to the muscles, to restore this kind of homeostasis, to get to remove metabolites from the muscles, to get everything reset, essentially, improve the muscle's ability to, pull ions back in. All of that kind of stuff is more of this general systemic conditioning, the general aerobic fitness that I referred to. So conditioning does have those two components, directly impacting the sport performance and the sport skill, and indirectly affecting the sports skill by allowing the athlete to recover faster. So not just do the sports skill in a higher volume in a given single bout, but to repeated bouts of the sports skill without degradation in performance, which has a heavy overall aerobic component to it.
So what would that look like?
What would that conditioning look like?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of cases, it's very generalized conditioning. So it's going to be very, very simple, like low intensity, raising the heart rate enough to trigger some of those like eccentric adaptations to the heart, increasing stroke volume, increasing cardiac efficiency, increasing peripheral capillary density, like a lot of these fundamental aerobic adaptations that can be done through very low intensity work. And it's, I always kind of say it's free money for a lot of these athletes too, because there's very, very low recovery costs to a lot of this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's relative. And, I think a lot of people in, bodybuilding backgrounds may, who spend endless hours on the stepper may already be familiar with this. But I think if athletes haven't done that kind of cut or, an old school cut and haven't done a lot of cardio, they don't realize how much that may actually benefit, because it doesn't have to be intense. It doesn't have to be a lot of hours per week. It's just an intelligently constructed cardiovascular conditioning program that's designed to use as little minimum effective dose +1, just enough to help improve their system, which should not negatively impact their lifting capacity at all.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of heart rate range, I know it will obviously vary from person to person, but as a rough guide, what kind of heart rate ranges are they usually working in for that low hanging fruit?
I'm usually keeping it around 65 to 70%. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of debate about what a zone 2 heart rate is and what zones are and everything else. And we can get into that whole debate, but I think the zone debate is by and large completely overblown. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people get way too slavish. Zone 2 is this whole big thing. Everybody should be doing zone 2. And now people are going, oh, you need to do more zone 3. And I'm going, look, just do something that gets to the point where your rate of respiration is starting to increase a little bit. And that's fine. Mm-hmm. Just get to the point, because if you're breathing more deeply, if you're just starting to sweat, you're probably doing enough. That's probably 70% of your heart rate. There are some systems that define zone 2 as 72 to 80%. There are some that say 65%. I try not to worry about it. I'm just like, just do it to the point where you can just barely carry on a conversation. It's uncomfortable for you to start monologuing in more than 15 to 20 word sentences.
True.
That's the proper level of intensity.
I'm laughing because my peak, because all this was taboo, right?
Yeah.
Carrying on the conversation was my cardio. And that's not a good thing, right? And thankfully things have changed, over the years. But I mean, as you were coming up with all this stuff, those were the people that you were working with.
Man, I got to tell you, it was like sort of the running joke that like holding your breath to tie your shoelaces was kind of like enough to like get you, like that's how you knew it was a successful bulking strength cycle was when tie the shoelace and like your face
I did it.
Red by the
I did it. That's when you knew the meat, you're ready.
Yeah.
It was good. Blood pressure was high. Everything was good.
Exactly.
You couldn't recover for shit, but it just figured, well, I'm peaking.
But I think
need to.
I think what's great, you mentioned that, is like there are so many people now who don't realize, and in a lot of strength circles, especially like elite strength sport, there's still very much like, hey, like this stuff's going to happen to you when you're deep in like meat peaking phase and all that. Like you're so dialed, and that kind of stuff happens. But at the time, that was considered recreational lifters were taking that perspective. And everybody on the recreational side was taking this ultra hardcore perspective, thinking that they were the top 0.5%. And they weren't anywhere near it. And it's going, look, you can maybe make that your goal when you are getting on a platform with some of the strongest people in the world. And you know that that last little ragged bit of prep there makes the difference. And, you know, even especially when you're like, you know, when you're lifting in gear and all that, and like the way the gear fits and all that really matters. And, you know, if you're not filling out that suit properly, it's not going to support you the way it needs to. And like, there's so much more of that complaint. And you had people who were just recreational lifters who were squatting 315, thinking that, okay, the way to get to 405 is to follow those same principles.
No, unfortunately, I was cheerleading it and giving people high fives, and I'm sorry. You know, at some point, you just got to come out and say that you were wrong. You know, that's kind of how this all kind of evolves over time, you know, and it's, the clues were all there. I mean, we were doing GPP, we were doing conditioning work. Like it was all there. Like, well, why are you doing this? But yet your end result is having to take a deep breath and hold your breath to tie your shoes. Like how GPP is that? You know, obviously that wasn't working, you know, effectively, but you learn over time. And it's better today, but there still are those small cohorts, you know, that kind of fall in that, usually led by people that are my age that are still kind of telling people to do the same shit that we used to do and kind of don't evolve with everything that's around to be able to see that that's wrong. You know, it's kind of the nature of how all this works.
When you're dealing with these lifters and we start bringing in that cardiovascular component, because this is something that I think you might have a unique perspective on right now. We'll go down the rabbit hole of science and good and bad and so on. But, you know, right now, a lot of people have in their mindsets like optimal rest periods for strength training, for hypertrophy, all this type of thing. But I think the context people forget there is like, how aerobically fit are the participants that you're testing?
Big time.
So for you now, when you're training these athletes who are getting aerobically fitter, but are still trying to or are operating at a pretty high level in the strength world or whatever, what do you see happening to like their training density, like their ability to go? So then all of those guidelines kind of go out the window then?
A lot of them do change, because I'll have people who are, you know, in between, you know, like max sets, max singles, doubles, used to be 6, 7, 8 minutes, sometimes more, just to feel like, okay, I'm back, I'm recovered, you know, especially with knee wraps and the like, where it's, okay, I got to take some time. You know, people have been doing it for longer now, doing the conditioning for longer. They say 2.5 to 3 minutes, I'm ready to go again. And in some cases, that added density, it's, you know, it's obviously a time saver. Quality of the lifting stays good. Sometimes they do get in extra sets and all that, but training density does go up quite a bit. And, you know, you'll have formerly 1.5-hour sessions, 2-hour sessions taking about an hour flat.
You just touched on something that it drives me nuts, right? Because if you want to say science-based or bro-based, you know, you need 3 minutes between sets. You know, it's just like this general rule. And it's like, well, what if you're in shitty shape? You know, then that's not enough. But what if you're in really good shape? You know, then you're going to be able to have we're all forgetting that people adapt to the training stimulus that's placed upon them. You know, and that's kind of left out of all the equations with, you know, the science-based talks. And I get it, they're quoting studies. I'll let you kind of rant about all that kind of stuff. But there's real people here, you know, and you can't take that and say, okay, 2 minutes rest and give it to this person here that's in terrible fucking shape that probably needs 10, you know, with higher loads, and vice versa. You don't tell the person that's in decent shape or that isn't, you know, should be in better shape, you have to take 10. You know, 10's like way too much, man. You'd be in the gym 5 sets of 3. You'd be in the gym for fucking right there an hour, right? And that's without warm-ups. Like, get in better shape to be able to get that down to where it's like 3, you know, and now the training density increases, but you have time to do the conditioning shit to be able to help you recover, the accessories and all the other. This drives me absolutely nuts.
I completely agreed too, because one of the things is like the more you do this too, even at the high level, it eventually becomes, if you're well conditioned, eventually becomes more like the emotional side of getting ready for your next heavy set. You get done with that first one, you're shaking up a little bit, like your whole body is just kind of like, all right, I got to get myself back down. that's conditioning. You could, if you get a proper conditioning, you can go again in 2 minutes, but that varies as well, depending on, what your headspace is and how much that took out of you mentally. So again, yeah, there's such a variety. Someone who's in bad shape, so much of it is basically like, I always get the question, how long do I recover between sets? It's going, well, when you're ready. Like that's all there is to it. How long does it take you to be able to do the next set and achieve the target objective? Oh, a minute and a half. Then a minute and a half. Oh, it takes me 5 minutes. Okay, then 5 minutes.
True.
Like that's.
Now, what would be the best metric if we wanted to try to quantify that? Would it be resting heart rate? Or could the resting heart rate be good enough, but metabolically you're still not ready for a next heavy bout?
Yeah.
I mean, it depends. So you'll have your opinion, but if the goal of this, if we're looking at performance-based, then for me, it would be the minimum threshold that allows the performance to stay at the desired level, which, the limiting factor on that could be emotional, in terms of resources or resting heart rate, whatever. But I would look at it as whatever you need to do to achieve the 5 reps or whatever the load would be, which I'm going to counter what you said a little bit. Just to say, like, do you find with most of the strength athletes who maybe aren't in as good a shape as they should be, rather than saying go when you're ready, should it be go just a little bit before? Because when you think you're ready is when you've been to the bathroom, sent 2 emails, drank your Monster, you're like, I could go now. Yeah. Whereas for those who...
It's like you're doing a second workout at this point.
Yeah. So like, is it like, whenever you think you're ready, just cut 20 seconds off there and let's try that.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, because it can definitely get extended. And I think some people will be more, they want to err almost on the side of taking more time when it might actually benefit them to take less time.
Sure.
Because it's going, as soon as you do a set, you're cooling down a little bit. You're trying to balance your recovery with not cooling down. And I think if you let yourself, if you're used to cooling down too much, you're used to recovering too much, like recovery kind of goes like this, asymptotic. You recover very quickly in the first minute or two. Every extra minute, you're not really recovering that much unless you're in really bad shape. You start cooling down almost immediately. Sure. So yeah, I would agree with that. I like that. Take whenever you're ready and chop 20 seconds off it.
Now, I would say, we mentioned like the conjugate approach and training all these different facets, not just of strength, but also of endurance. But obviously there's the crossover there directly in terminology, which is the capacity of strength endurance, which I think probably doesn't get spoken about enough. Now, how do you go about training that? Because that tends to be a bit of a gray area where people think, well, I get stronger over here and then I get fitter over here. And then this thing that exists in the middle just kind of, I assume, gets better because those things are better, which isn't always the case.
My contention has been that strength endurance is kind of a derived characteristic.
Okay.
There's no directly measurable metric for strength endurance. Usually improving strength endurance is a combination of improved strength, improved movement efficiency, patterning, expertise, pain tolerance, aerobic capacity, both systemic and local. It's like all these things coming together. And so I think one of the crucial components of strength endurance is the skill component that I think is left out. And I think it's why when you have people who get very, very good at multiple repetitions, it's because they know how to economize their movement. They know how to economize their output on every single repetition. It always used to be interesting. If you watched, what was it? Rich Froning, I think, could do he could squat 405 for some ungodly amount. But that, if you looked at his maximum squat, it's not what you would have anticipated. I mean, you squat 405 for 20, you picture somebody up in the, 600 range. I think it was like 500 flat or something like that. And you think, well, how is that possible? And you watch him move, and every single repetition, there is no strength or explosiveness beyond what was needed. It was just enough work to get the repetition done. And I think strength endurance is very much a knowing how little force you need to exert and how much economy of movement and economy of power you can put into this particular lift or movement. So I think it's a confluence of a lot of different things. And so I think it's one of those things where if you think of strength endurance as something you improve by doing the movement a lot, that's really true, but that's it's because you've practiced doing this movement so efficiently. So I think a big component, you improve your maximum strength. Like here's one example, and I think I do talk about this in the book. It's climbers. So climbers are always known for having great strength endurance in their hands, and of course incredible grip strength to begin with. You look at a lot of the protocols in which they test and test various aspects of like climber strength and climber hand strength development. And they look at like some of the holds that climbers will do and some of the dynamic gripping movements and everything else. It's sort of interesting that a lot of the protocols that climbers tend to fall into when doing any kind of like strength improvement tends to be actually fairly similar to what we would consider just traditional strength training in terms of like 20 to 30 second sets at X contraction repeatedly. It's a lot of practice. It's a lot of repetitions. It's not just squeezing something for an hour. It's just the same basic principles of strength training plus movement efficiency plus pain tolerance in that area all comes together to create incredible strength endurance.
So do you find then that it's not generally isn't something, because people will look at training it specifically, right, as like, this is a modality I need to try and bench 80% for 5x5 with less rest periods or whatever. Like, in your opinion, then, is that some like a facet that people don't need to focus on? Instead, they bring up all the other things, and then that is just more skill, so you're saying, than anything.
Well, and I think that's kind of it, and that's where the whole differentiation becomes silly. It's going, well, okay, so to improve, I'm training NFL combine. I need to get 225 for 30, so I'm just going to bench 225 nonstop to improve my strength endurance. And I'm going to go, well, it's not strength endurance. You got to improve strength endurance. Oh, so what should I do for it? Well, you should bench heavy, and you should keep running, and then you should get really good at benching 225. Oh, so I should just bench 225 all the time. Well, yes. So it kind of ends up being a lot of the same general recommendations. But I think that's it though. It's really emphasizing that it's not enough to just go and bang out multiple sets of 225. Like when you're doing it, when you're training for strength endurance, you need to train kind of in that time domain. And again, train for efficiency in that movement. You want to get good at doing push-ups for, the Army physical fitness test or anything like that. It's not just enough that you just do like sets and clusters of push-ups. Like you actually need to get used to performing push-ups to the point of fatigue and economize your movement in it and realize that, hey, maybe this method that I use in short sets of banging out the first few and then slowing down from there, maybe that's extremely detrimental to being able to do like 50 in a row or 60 in a row. So there are certain things in skill that you learn, there's certain things that benefit your strength endurance that you learn only by doing higher volume work.
I can demonstrate this with a story. Louis used to have us do that. He would call it lactic acid tolerance training, which is stupid because it's not really what we were doing. But it would be the safety squat bar with 315 for multiple sets of 2. And it would be 15, 12, 15, 20 sets, whatever it's going to be. And it was always with that set weight, which is a low percentage for what we were doing. And I would be doing this with him back to back went on for several years. But after 10 sets, I'm done. I'm like just toast. And I'm like, how in the fuck? How is he beating me so bad all this time? And then I saw him do it with somebody else. I was injured or whatever it was. And I'm like, he's not putting maximum intent in his reps. He's just standing up with 315.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay. Yeah. So then the next time we did it, I went from like 11 sets to like 25. Yeah. I'm like, well, are you done yet? And it's like, I get it. Right. Yeah. But that intent is what we're talking about. Right. Yep. And that's that training ability. But I don't know how you go about teaching that intent if you don't know the explosive one first.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And vice versa. It takes experience to be able to grasp this. And I'm sure it's going to be exercise specific too. Yeah. Like a barbell curl, but probably be stupid, right? But a squat's a really good illustration of that. But when you're speaking about what you asked, then that becomes that component. The 225 bench kind of becomes that component too. So, somebody's doing that for the combine and they're just ripping out maximum sets. It's like, whoa, dude, there's two factors here. You need to control your intent, but you also need to understand there's going to be a clock ticking. There's a time where you're just not going to do it. It's 30 seconds, 20, whatever your time is. Yeah. That's very hard to increase that time, which is the training that we're talking about here, is how do you increase that time? Right. Yep. But for these people training for the combine and they got 8 weeks, they're probably not going to increase the time. Yeah. Right. You need to increase the speed at which you can get those reps done with controlled intent, that it doesn't kick you on the back end of all that, which becomes fascinating from a training perspective. because now you're looking at these different variables.
And I really like to focus on the idea of intent and like movement intent, because I mean, that's something that's, it's so crucial to, like, you know, experienced lifters very much know about intent, like movement intent. Anyone who's done true dynamic effort work knows about movement intent and velocity and explosive intent. Understanding that concept of intent, and like any given lift, like a squat is not just a squat. Depending on how you do it, you're training completely different things, whether it's a max effort, whether it's an explosive dynamic effort, whether you're doing it for, you know, economical intent. There's so many different approaches to it. And, you know, like being able to distinguish that and break that down is such a crucial part of like any of this kind of training, because it's realizing that you improve in movements, not just by, you know, by varying the intent, by focusing on different kinds of intent for each one. And, you know, it's just funny thinking about that, because on the endurance side as well, it's like, what is your intent in this particular session?
Well, I was going to say, is this the lifting equivalent of just learning to pace? Pacing?
In a lot of ways, yes. It's because along a big part of, you know, again, like a running program, when you don't care how much volume you're doing, you just throw miles at people, they improve no matter what, to a certain point. But when you get better, the intent of each session, calibrating the intensity, understanding that faster isn't always better. Because, you know, operating a certain percentage is going to allow you to trigger a certain adaptation. So much of that intent, understanding the intent of every session, understanding the intent, like, hey, this is a maximum speed intent because we are working on this particular component of motor coordination. Or lower intensity intent is better here because we are working, we're bringing your pace back a little bit so that we can focus on repeat performance and sustainability and X amount of recovery. So it's, you know, it's, and like you said, you have to learn explosiveness and what that means before you learn to back off a little bit. But
everybody knows how to jump.
Everybody knows how to jump. Yeah.
So it's inherently there.
Yeah.
It's just got to be connected to whatever they're doing.
And I think that's such a huge part of putting these kinds of complex training programs together. Because, you know, again, like even, you know, hybrid methodology is pretty complex if you try to break it down too much. It's understanding intent, and it's understanding the why for each workout and what the intended intent is, why you're operating at that level of intensity, and how do you know if you're doing something right. Mm-hmm. So
cool. I was just, so Dave kind of already aired a frustration about rest periods, obviously in relation to like scientific guidelines. And you wrote in your summary to us about what you want to cover, the overcomplication of the fitness field. I believe I wrote that. I put it in quotes, so I presume that's what you said. What do you mean by that? What creates that frustration for you?
Yeah, it's funny because I just said that like hybrid programs are complex, but they're complex but simple. Like it's sort of thing where it's relatively easy when you see it on paper. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of complexity. I think one of the biggest issues is, and one of the biggest limitations, like I've worked in clinical trials, like I've worked in clinical research, and every single study, a better study is one that tests fewer parameters in general. The more focused what you're looking at, you sort of have to know what you're looking for. You have to know your null hypothesis, and you need to know like, okay, here's this result versus that result. What am I looking for here? The more things you're looking for in a study, the more complex and challenging it becomes, the fuzzier the final data analysis is, the bigger the sample size needs to be. If you're just saying, what is the optimal rest period and trying to do a study that's going to test that, you're going to get a given result based on one study. You conduct a different study the next time, look at slightly different parameters, you might get a different result. There are so many subjective factors in there as well that you're going to come up with 8 different studies that all give you 8 different results based on different parameters. And you're going to try to pull all those together. If you follow the research, you start chasing research on every single thing, you're going to have these ideas of what is the optimal movement pattern when I'm doing a pull down? How do I recruit the proper combination of upper and lower fibers? Do I need to do like, how many different row variants do I need to do? And is this, you know, mid-angle row variant the best for recruiting all these fibers optimally? And what is the optimal hand position? When you get into this min-maxing idea, because you're chasing what the research says is the best, you're chasing a bunch of essentially yes or no questions, A or B questions, and trying to come up with a training methodology from it. You can overcomplicate that to an absolutely unrealistic degree. If you chase studies, you will come up with so many different conflicting results that trying to reconcile them becomes a completely unworkable program. Or trying to optimize everything results in a program that nobody wants to do and nobody can do. I mean, if you're chasing what's optimal for back hypertrophy, like lat hypertrophy, but then at the same time, you want what's optimal for shoulder health and you want what's optimal for, there are so many different factors you can look at that your attempt to optimize one parameter is going to leave it. Your program is going to depend just on what you decided was optimal and what you wanted to optimize. That may only be 1/3 of the things that your program should actually be looking at. So people get this myopic focus, this putting these little pieces together, trying to build something and essentially reinventing the wheel, starting from the ground up. When in reality, a lot of cases, you don't need to chase the research on a lot of this stuff. You need to look at the bigger picture, look at patterns of success, realize that a lot of the systems we're working with are still more complicated than we give them credit for. Yes, we know the factors that are critical for hypertrophy. We know the general rules that cause muscle growth, but we still don't know every last detail about what is the critical threshold you need. What is the role of certain metabolites in hypertrophy and fatigue? What causes discomfort? What causes muscle soreness? There are a lot of things where we have a lot of good theories, but no discrete answers. So trying to take any tentative answer as the starting point for our program is completely wrong-headed. And we have a lot of people debating these minutiae over and over again and differentiating programs based on the things that don't matter. And good, solid programming is not complicated. It can be very specific, it can have a lot of thought put into it, but so much of this chasing optimization is resulting in people focusing on, like I said, essentially the wrong things, like discussing what is the proper range of motion for this movement. There are advantages to doing this. Oh, well, there are advantages to doing this. It leads to this whole noise that isn't making anyone any better at any of this.
But doesn't the question have to become optimal for what, for who, and when? Because, if I come to you and say, Alex, I'm 4 weeks out from my powerlifting meet, my squat is really not where I need it to be, I've just been lax with it, or I've been injured or whatever. What can I do in the next 4 weeks to make my squat as good as possible? Yeah. What is optimum for my squat right now? You're going to have an answer.
Yeah.
And if I say, Alex, I've got a meet in 12 months.
Yeah.
I want to hit a big squat. What is it? Those are going to be two very different approaches, right? So then does optimal become a fallacy?
Very much. I mean, the fallacy of optimal, the fallacy of what's better without context is huge. Because even talking about things like, there are a lot of people who get very in the weeds with velocity-based training, which can be a fantastic tool. You can look at velocity and you can use that to assess when an individual is fatiguing. How much productive work are we doing? When velocity drops by X percentage, are we losing the target training stimulus and all that? But there's individual variance to that. There's in-session variance to that. At what point do we consider a threshold, a velocity drop threshold, to be a red flag that no further work should be done?
Well, there would be adaptation-based variables too.
Yeah.
The better they get at it, the further off that set's going to be where it drops off.
Right.
Which goes back to the whole other thing I was talking about with the optimal. It's the way I kind of like to look at that is, what are the guardrails around that? Yeah. If this is the optimal, then how far away are we allowed to get on this side and how far are we allowed to get on this side? And then when we look at that whole thing, it's so now you just encompassed everything that bro science basically says, because it falls within those guardrails.
Right.
And pretty much everything that everybody else has done that's worked, and everybody that's doing things now that's worked, it only gets non-optimal when it falls off that one straight rail.
Yeah.
But yet all optimal has deviations.
And I think that optimal does have deviation, and a lot of the deviations, a lot of the guardrails are kind of, I want to say arbitrary, but subjective to begin with. I mean, so here's one of the other things from clinical trials is, and this might be a little extended, but I think it's relevant. During drug development, there are a lot of drugs that fail coming through clinical trials. I think only about 1% of drugs that go through that successfully start phase 1 trials actually make it through phase 3 to market. In some cases it's higher, some cases it's lower, depends on the...
Isn't phase 1 where they just like give it to kids to take for recreational use?
Yeah. Phase 1 is like when you're on college and you see these like thing recruiting for a trial. It's phase 1 is always healthy normals. Basically just saying, hey, if we give this to somebody who's healthy, they're not sick. They might be. They're going to be. So that's phase 1. It's typically pretty small, right? So like in drug development, when they come up with a drug and they're like, hey, look, we found this drug that does this. It affects this pathway, which we think can cure this. We've tested it in animals. We've done preclinical testing. Great. We think it's going to do what we think it's going to do. We're going to take this to phase 1. Phase 1, hey, look, we gave it to a bunch of college students. They didn't die. Great. Awesome. Okay, cool. Pass phase 1. Phase 2, they're going to say, okay, now we're going to start giving it to people who actually have the condition. And we're going to give different amounts of it to each one to see what's the effective dose. Okay, we give 1 milligram a day, doesn't have any effect. 20 milligrams a day, and it starts causing side effects. 10 milligrams a day seems to have some sort of effect. It's well tolerated. Okay, 10 milligrams is going to be our dose. Now we got to do our phase 3 trial. We're giving this drug to sick people. How do we determine if this drug is worth marketing? What is this endpoint we're looking for? Is this endpoint we're looking for an improvement in symptoms? Is the endpoint we're looking for an improvement in some blood marker of something? Like, what is the improvement? And we get into this with things like, statins and cholesterol. Like, oh, we've lowered cholesterol. Is that making people live longer? Or are other side effects from this not working? So choosing the proper endpoint is always going to be a little arbitrary. And if you choose the wrong endpoint, you can either make something seem more effective than it really is, or take something that's really effective and make it seem completely ineffective. One of the reasons, for example, SARMs, a lot of these steroidal-like compounds, one of the reasons they haven't really been approved is because a lot of cases saying something is going to treat muscle wasting in elderly individuals is very hard to approve. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons for that is it's not enough just showing that they're retaining more muscle mass. In a lot of cases, the argument is, does it improve quality of life? So a lot of these tests where they may show an increase in muscle mass in elderly individuals, but no change to overall quality of life as measured by any number of metrics, the drug may technically have failed, even though it did exactly what they thought it was going to do. Mm-hmm. So we get into this with a lot of sports science as well, where we're saying, okay, we're testing to see 2 different protocols here, and we're going to say which one is more effective based on this endpoint that we've chosen. Okay, so according to this protocol, this exercise, this number of sets per week is better than this one because we're measuring like, amount of swelling or, cross-sectional area of this or the other. We're looking at this particular pull down versus that pull down, and it's showing so much more activity in these fibers versus those fibers. Therefore, this kind of pull down is better for stimulating lower lat fibers. Okay, this stimulates them more, but are we showing more muscle growth there? Mm-hmm. Is there any evidence that our endpoint that we've chosen is activation? But if muscle growth is what we're looking for, we've got studies arguing effectiveness based on the wrong endpoint. True. So in a lot of cases in sports science, we got to look at the endpoint that's chosen. So there's a lot of discussion about what's optimal, what's better, what's worse. The endpoint may not be something that actually really matters because the endpoint may just be the only thing we could test, not necessarily the most effective.
True. So to try and dumb that down for me, would the way to look at that almost be like when you're looking at these studies, it's like, what is the question they're actually trying to answer?
Exactly.
Because, and is that question pertinent to me and what I'm trying to do? Because what you're saying is a lot of the time people are inferring what seem like meaningful outcomes from perhaps non-meaningful outcomes.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Summarized perfectly is that we're seeing this endpoint changing here. We're seeing this question was asked. Was it even the right question to ask? Okay, if we do this intervention, is it going to result in this improving over this? But are the things you're measuring there even relevant to an athlete? Are they relevant to a powerlifter? Are they relevant to a bodybuilder? Are they the correct endpoints? And in most cases, it's like, yes, we've seen a change in one value that we think is probably relevant to the outcome we're looking for. but it also might not be. There might be other things conflicting with it. Yes, okay, we're looking at more stimulus of this particular set of muscle fibers. Does that mean more effective tension? Does that mean more growth? Or does that just mean more specific stress and fatigue, which is going to mean more breakdown of those fibers in this exercise, and therefore net possibly less growth? So it's one of those things where so many of the questions being asked, we're not able to look at a lot of big picture. It's very, very difficult. I mean, how many studies have we seen that are 6-month-long studies on 1,000 experienced strength trained athletes on 2 different types of programs? Like none. These are all by nature just very, very short term, trying to ask specific questions. We're not saying, okay, on these 2 programs, we've got 100 guys with their pro cards now. We're going to have them each do a different program for a year. How many of them end up in a top 3 national finish with each program? It's too much. So those questions don't get answered. And you say, okay, well, we can't. We're doing the best we can. But we have this cottage industry of people trying to take all these answers and give their own unique spin on what they think it means practically. And that's where I think so much of this distraction comes in.
As someone who's worked in the science field, and this is a bit of a philosophical question, I apologize, but people would say that right now we're in like a science-based era, whatever, of fitness, right? But would you argue that that's actually true? Because right now, to me, I would define science as like constantly questioning the current knowledge base and trying to strive for closer to the truth or whatever, some arbitrary definition like that. Whereas a lot of people right now are just taking what they perceive as evidence and just applying it non-contextually, like this is the flag in the sand. I am evidence-based because of this one study that backs up probably the thing I already wanted to say. Yeah. That doesn't sound a lot like science.
It's what I kind of call scientism more than anything else. It's this idea of I am pulling together, not just research that fits my bias, but I have a brand. I have something that I am known for, whether it's high volume or low volume or something else. And so I am going to choose to interpret and put forward every bit of research that agrees with what I'm saying already and kind of diminish those that don't. And in a field that has arguably a lot of issues with quality in terms of the science, I mean, every science, a lot of science has this problem right now, the replication crisis and all that. But if the issue is really one of quality, then it's very easy to diminish the quality of stuff that disagrees with me. And I think one of the problems right now is there are very few pure scientists in the field. There are very few individuals who I think will be seen as effective communicators no matter what they say. Because a lot of people who have a larger platform and who communicate certain ideas generally tend to be known. It is so difficult to see people who don't immediately monetize or come up with a system based on what they think the science is telling them. They become a communicator and they suddenly have a sponsored product. And, hey, get that bag, guys. Like, I don't care, but it diminishes your ability to be an effective communicator. And I think the lack of true scientists in the field who, they're just seen as a conduit to information is relatively low. So I think we're at a sign where I would say that a lot of people are, I would say, research justified rather than evidence-based. And that's
distinction.
Yeah, because I think it's like they can always find a study to back what they're saying, but that's not necessarily the preponderance of information, because science, published papers, I always say they're a dialogue. Anytime you see a journal article, anytime you see something, this is supposed to be communication. A paper is considered communication and part of a discussion. It's not considered an answer. It's like, hey, we're a bunch of guys. We tested this. I say guys, gender neutral. We tested this. We put this together. And this is what we came up with. And this is the answer we came up with. Does that mean this is the correct answer? No, it just means this is what we came up with. And that can be wrong. It can be right. It can be, and they're always willing to say, yeah, we were wrong.
True. Now, you said in your summary for us as well, most sports science studies are garbage, which is great, which is cool. So obviously you've already alluded to some of the reasons behind that. But, for those of us right now who, the average person who is maybe consuming this type of content, who is getting bombarded with these, this study finds that you've been doing the wrong lat pull down the whole time, or triple your muscle gain with whatever. What are some of the the standout things for you in these studies that make you make that statement that other people might be able to like cotton onto and be like, oh, okay, well, actually, I did click that link, and even from the abstract, I can infer that actually what that person is saying is not particularly true.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying what you're watching, make sure to take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe.
Yeah. And I think the thing to note about garbage is still at one point useful.
Yeah.
it's still useful to someone, maybe mostly raccoons. But like for a lot of the studies out there, they're like I said, I alluded to the replication crisis we've had before, which is the difficulty that I think we have in science of literally just that, saying, okay, well, you did this study with these parameters, you got these results. I'm going to try to do the exact same study with the exact same parameters. Wait a minute, I'm getting completely different results. So this is a huge problem. This has been talked about for a long time, is that we really have a crisis where most studies can't be replicated in any field. Like we're really having issues there. And add on to the fact that like a lot of studies that find results that are not particularly exciting, like where the experiment just fails or is inconclusive, they just don't get published. So, because I mean, most of us know that like we try something and it doesn't work or it has no effect. We try some new training intervention that doesn't make any difference whatsoever. I think, hey, I wonder if this exercise is going to be a game changer for my athletes. And you start implementing it and you're like, okay, let's see the difference. And there's no difference. Most of us are like, all right, so that didn't do anything. So, I'm going to tell everybody that didn't do anything. Yeah. Hey, nobody ever does that in science, like in published science. It's very, very rare to see that. So what you get is a lot of the stuff that's coming out is stuff that had a finding one way or another, but can't be replicated. Is it an interesting discussion? Sure, it's an interesting discussion piece, but it probably shouldn't be taken purely at face value. We find this piece of research that's now talking about a new high volume approach. That should not at all change what you're doing as a coach. That should give you something interesting to think about. It should give you something to look at their endpoints, look at what they did, look at how they approached it and think, oh, okay. Like I'm going to, first of all, let me see what I can learn from this that doesn't involve just reading the abstract, then reading the conclusion at the end and being like, oh, okay. Like it's basically saying like anytime somebody does a study review and it's like, here are the findings of this study. I'm like, okay, that's interesting, but that shouldn't change what you do. And I think one of the problems now, I said, especially in sports science, is a lot of these studies, there's not a huge profit motive in a lot of these studies. It's not like, I mean, even in...
Could it be argued that's a good thing?
It could be. It could definitely be, but it also means that these studies tend to be relatively small.
Sure.
There's not a lot of people, there's not a lot of financial incentive to conduct larger studies that are longer. They tend to be, hey, what do we think we can realistically recruit some people for on a relatively shoestring budget? So by nature, a lot of them are not going to be terribly conclusive.
Sure.
And it leads us to the problem where we have a huge volume of research that we can look at, but we need to be looking at it in terms of trends.
Sure.
And I think that's like, okay, the noise, there's a whole bunch of people over there shouting. What things tend to generally get, come to the surface there, and let's look at those as interesting avenues for investigation.
Sure. And then when we're looking at these studies in this way, and you're talking about the issues with replication, what do you think the drivers behind that are? Do you think it's just to do with like the variance we see in populations that are being used? Or do you think some studies are biasing because they want to get a certain answer? Or, what do you think are the main problems that we're having where we're not finding that? Yeah,
in a lot of cases, there are a lot of things that go into like a sports science study. Because in sports science, I don't want to say we're not looking at hard science. We are, but there's a huge subjective element to even how exercises are performed. Like, let's say we have a very clear study where everybody is doing 3 sets of 8 to failure. How are we measuring failure? How are we assessing failure correctly in even like 10 athletes? Are we observing every single one of these sets? Is the same person observing every one of these sets? Maybe we have somebody who's a little bit nicer than others who says, yeah, you definitely failed on that. Maybe we have somebody else who is, like the typical like high school math teacher turned football coach. My football coach was a high school math teacher as well. I love the guy to death. He's a great coach. And who says, you're not done yet. You know, like you can do one more set. Like, how are we defining that? So the person conducting the study, the subject in the study, those may be different. The person interpreting the results may be looking at different things. If we're looking at like ultrasound cross-sectional area, there's so many individual variances thrown in there that we can have two different groups following exactly the same study, and even cultural differences in the people who are sitting there telling the person to do one more set may completely change the outcome. True. And I think that's because there's such a kind of a squishy human component to a lot of this work. It's very difficult to be absolutely consistent, because, you know, even seeing just in participating in a couple of these studies and some of these, you know, sports science focused study, you know, one that was looking at like leg extensions and quad, looking at stress on the patellar tendon and things like that. Like the person who's watching you do it makes such a big difference. And, you know, depending on what your mindset is when you go in, that's going to determine how much effort you put in. So we're looking at so many variables that a cluster of 8 people done in a study in Texas in the summer on like college students at a D1 school might be very different than a cluster of people done in like, you know, Spain in the winter at a more multidisciplinary, less sport focused school, like whatever. They could be wildly, wildly different. Same protocol, same general population, even same like physical aspects, wildly, wildly different outcomes.
So as a researcher, then, let's say you were to be on the other side of this relationship, right? You are the person doing the research. Is it almost like a no-win situation? Because you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? I think we had, was it Menno Henselmans when he came out? He was talking about the argument of like, well, you only ever test beginners and it doesn't go to advanced athletes. And he made the point that, well, look, we normally only have 6 to 8 weeks. So unless you test on a beginner, you're not going to get any adaptation in 8 weeks with an advanced athlete anyway. So you have nothing to measure, nothing to, you know, create a magnitude with. So we either do it on beginners and have something, or do it on advanced athletes and nothing ever works. Do you get what I'm saying? Like he's making the argument then that an answer is better than zero answer. And I just wonder, like, as someone who's maybe been on the other side of the curtain, as it were, is some of the criticism, hate, you know, whatever, wrongly put there? Because like, it's not, what you're defining here is almost a foundational flaw that isn't their fault. They're just working within a system where, like, how do you get the right answer when you're dealing with those constraints?
Well, it's interesting because you have to deal with, then you get in this, do we deal with a lot more epidemiological studies, longitudinal studies, looking at 2 different groups of lifters who do this, who do that. I think there's not enough of a profit motive for anyone to sponsor a study like that. I think it'd be really tough to get somebody who wants to sponsor a 6-month study of elite lifters. I think we would need more of that though, because again, right now it's like, okay, great. In untrained people studying for 6 to 8 weeks, we got an answer. Okay. Like, we got a useless answer.
Yeah. Well, I'd have to think that those people doing the research, their passion should just be the research.
Exactly.
Right? Because then they're not going to care what the answer is. Their passion is the process of the research. Right? The coaches aren't doing the research. Yeah. Right? The coaches are kind of like outside this bubble, but they see all that. Right. So the trick is, how do the coaches use, you know, what comes out to better their programs or to better what they're doing. Yeah. Right. And that's where the disconnect is. You know, I think that the coaches are thinking that the researchers are coaches. Yeah. You know, and they're providing answers. Yeah. All they're really doing is creating more conversations.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. And to be able to, you know, pull more ideas to be able to put through there. Yeah. So I guess where I'm getting at is a lot of the coaches of some of the athletes, I think, misunderstand that the researcher, they think they're coaches. They shouldn't be, right? Because I would question how well they are at what they do. Kind of like with the hybrid thing, you're not going to be like 100% of everything, right? So if you're like doing 3 different things as a researcher, then you're probably not the greatest researcher. Exactly. You know what I'm saying? So, and that could happen. The funding is a big thing too, right? And compliance. Are you really going to talk 100 pro bodybuilders into doing what you tell them to do for a year, when their window for competing might be 5-6 years? They're going to give you a whole no.
Good luck finding.
Yeah, and unless you have some myostatin drug or some shit that is worth that risk benefit,
right?
To kind of play into all that, which with your background in the research makes me. Tom and I were talking about this yesterday. Like, how do the peptides make their way through all this shit, right? Because we know insulin made its way through the clinical trials, growth hormone made it all the way through, but now we have this whole bunch of other peptides, which are essentially just amino acids. Like, how the fuck do you patent an amino acid?
Yeah. Well,
I'm asking seriously. Like, how does this happen?
Well, and the only way to patent it is, like, in a lot of cases, if that's general knowledge, you have to patent like a delivery method.
Yeah.
Because we've gotten approval to dispense this amino acid in this kind of carrier.
Yeah.
Okay, so somebody else can patent it in a different carrier. They just need to pay for the trials. So the only way you're going to get it patented is if some drug company says, okay, well, pretty much everybody is using BPC at this point. Is it worth it to us to run a clinical trial on BPC? Maybe if we can come up with some sort of novel delivery method and then get it clinically approved for treatment and then get them insurance bucks from it, maybe it's worth it for us. But if you can't, then it won't be patented. But all that's going to be patented at that point is the delivery method.
True.
For
and
BPC.
Is that, in these scenarios, like when we're talking peptides, like most of them, as far as I'm aware, like already exist in you as you are.
Yeah.
So like testosterone, you can't patent testosterone because then you'd own people.
Yeah.
It's like, I own the thing that's in your blood, basically.
Yeah.
So if that's going to be the way forever, then do you think there's going to be anything that stops the proliferation? Because right now it's like a boom, right? Like every week there is a new peptide that does something, right? So like, is this going to stop, or are we going to end up with like this catalog of peptides at home in a couple of years where we can cure everything?
I think that's kind of part of the curve we see, is that like the effective stuff does rise to the top. Like, granted, some things like testosterone have been around forever, and we keep hearing about it. And I don't know why, but there, like for the most part, the stuff that's effective that continues to get circulated that people have reported results with, like, I think one of the biggest things is, and even going back to the idea of, hey, is all sports science just, is any of this applicable? It's understanding that even if you don't do a double-blind placebo-controlled study, you can still collect your own data. And that's why I think coaches should be ruthless with tracking their own interventions and really tracking their own athlete performance completely honestly. Like, there are a lot of coaches who, they go back and they look at individual case studies, but they should really look over their entire body of athletes and athletic development over the course of their careers and really look at the interventions that worked and things that didn't, and just keep more meticulous records. From a scientific perspective, if I was given 24 studies of individuals, beginners, doing 8-week interventions versus 2 studies, or like 1 case report, or like a, let's say, overview of a bodybuilding coach who's been doing something for 10 years and has kept meticulous records of what kind of programs generally resulted in the biggest number of pro cards for him, I would say the information from that bodybuilding coach, provided it was of good quality, would probably be more useful. So I think what we really do need to see is a lot more attention paid to professionals who keep good records and who are actually able to show records of what they've done. That's, I think, one of the only ways that we're going to get good long-term data on interventions. And we do have good coaches who go back and talk about their methods and talk about, hey, this is what I did to create this champion. This is what I did. This is what my program do. We see this a lot in endurance sport, actually, which has been huge for the scientific rigor in the field, because we do have a lot of these like professional cycling teams and like professional running coaches talking about the interventions, triathlon coaches. The whole Norwegian method that's exploding now is a lot of sports scientists who are able to they basically took the equivalent of bro science from a lot of great coaches, looked at the scientific underpinnings, worked closely with those coaches, and now are able to work with elite athletes on testing some of these interventions. I think the more of that we get, especially in strength sport, the better quality we're going to see. But we also need strength coaches who are keeping meticulous records and then communicating with scientists. Here's what we did. And then have that be almost a partnership, that partnership between the peer researchers and the coaches to actually give the scientists access to these elite athletes and able to engage in these long-term interventions.
We've seen this in the past, right? The Soviet Union,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
China,
I've seen it. Yeah.
Bulgaria, so it extends through.
So in those,
Just not here.
Sorry.
Just not here. But that's also the place that we always look back on some of the stuff that came out of like, Soviet weightlifting and all that. And we go, wow, this is still useful. Mm-hmm. It's how many years old, and we're still looking at it like, wow, this is really good stuff. And I'm thinking, man, if we had more of that now, like if we were doing more of that here, we were doing more of that with powerlifters, more of that in the bodybuilding community. And unfortunately it's tough because a lot of these are kind of the Wild West out there. But I think we need to really be like, because we've got the, kind of quote unquote bro science people, and we've got this whole like evidence-based, and they still diverge too much. I think there have been some attempts to bring them closer together, but I think we need a little bit more unity there, because we're never going to get in the pure research side of things until we actually get these groups close enough that we have like sports scientists able to work closely with coaches on their elite athletes and testing these interventions. That's only going to be when there's a huge level of trust and communication.
I was going to say, do you think that the onus that's on coaches actually gets undermined in this whole process? Because how does science know what to study unless someone's in the trenches doing something? Yeah. Weight releases have existed since whenever in the USSR, right? But I think the first studies on them are like in the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
There's like a 30, 40 year time delay there, right? Like, but they would have never known to investigate weight releases if some crazy Russians didn't just go, oh, let's see, this looks weird. Let's try this. And voila, something happened, and so on and so forth. So is a concern of yours that if we become too evidence-based and whatever people are defining this as, people stop experimenting?
Yeah.
Because, I only stick to what's proven. But if you only do that, then nothing new gets proven, and we create this kind of negative feedback loop, I guess.
Yeah, because it's one thing that I've always lamented now, and I think I come back to this even when it talks to I talk about careers or anything else, is kind of the death of mentorship. Mm-hmm. And I think people in any career, the best thing they can do early on is find themselves a good mentor. And if you've been doing something for a while and you feel like, hey, I'm maybe not at the top of my game, but I'm pretty good, find yourself a mentee. Because I think that allows for fresh eyes to look at a lot of things that have been very well tested. And I think a lot of us who've been doing this for a while may not even necessarily realize how many things we do that don't get talked about very often. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of institutional knowledge and a lot of almost ancestral knowledge in a lot of older coaches who've been at this for a while. They don't even necessarily realize the quality and, I would say, almost unique lens that they look at their athletes through that I think later generations could really benefit from. And I think if we had, and you do see this, you absolutely do see this. And you see a lot of younger coaches, well, unfortunately, maybe even a little bit less, but you're even talking about how it's sometimes hard to find like new, good, highly dedicated employees, like trainers and people like that who just want to learn. Mm-hmm. And I think that is so important because that's one of the things that gets this institutional knowledge spread. It's going, oh yeah, I've been working with this guy who's been coaching for 30 years. And, these are the things that are done with these elite athletes over here. Let's investigate some of those, and I think that if more people going through sports science programs even went out and said, I want to find myself an elite coach, an elite powerlifting coach, an elite weightlifting coach, an elite whatever coach, and I just want to shadow them for a year. I don't care. I'll balance their books. I'll put their plates away for a year, but I want to learn what they do. That would be such a major step in development because it's like, you look at how many trades apprenticeships are seen as absolutely crucial in. And, training, coaching, it's a trade in a lot of ways because yes, there's absolutely science behind it, but there's also application of the science. There's best practices that go beyond what you encounter in the lab because in real world scenarios, there's infinite complexity. I would say coaching and training is a trade in that regard. And I think the more that we had, not just, hey, yeah, you're going to shadow this trainer who's been doing this for a year and you're brand new. It's like, okay, well, that's not really an apprenticeship. You're going to go find this person who's been coaching powerlifting for 25 years, and you're going to go learn what they do with their elite athletes. And you're going to take that back. You're going to take that back to your program and go, hey, here's something we should really be looking at. I think that's how the communication is.
With that one, I split the responsibility both ways, to the coaches and to the potential mentees. Because say when we were coming up, finding content wasn't as readily available as it is now. So you had to go, learn from that person to be able to truly absorb everything that they're doing. Now all the coaches have this way bigger digital footprint. Mm-hmm. So there may be people that are absorbed in your content, only your content, just devouring all that for like a year. Mm-hmm. You don't know it.
Yeah.
Right? Or Tom or myself. Yeah. Right? So they're kind of doing the same thing, but it's all digitally. Mm-hmm. It's not in person. So they don't see the context. They don't see the nuance. Exactly. They don't see all those other things, but they don't know those exist.
Exactly.
Because of when they came into this whole process. Right? And we know they exist. We know the nuance behind that, but we can't assume they know that exist. So part of that responsibility comes on the people that are putting that out there. Because if I was to go put myself in the shoes of the person who's 18, 19 years old now, I don't know if I would be traveling. I would find the person that I want to learn from, mm-hmm. and now I'd use AI. I'd use AI and devour everything that I possibly could, to find out what their methods and all that are. And it can be done at such a rapid pace that I don't know if you're even learning. Yeah. You're just absorbing because you're not. Yeah. The finding it is so easy. Yeah. Right. Where 2 years ago you'd have to Google it and it'd take more time. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying you would learn more, but you'd have to try harder to learn more, right, to be able to put the pieces together. And so you see what I'm saying? You can't, the fault's got to be evenly split. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the answer is, except speaking more about the nuance and the context that goes into all this. But the issue with that, when you're at that level, is now that's so far above all the beginner's head. Yeah. That what they need to know is just the general basic information, which most of the coaches that have been around for a long time, we all do a shitty job of putting out there.
That's true.
Because we take it all for granted, mm-hmm. that you should grab a dumbbell in the middle of the dumbbell. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Just things like that. And it's even when you make that type of content, you're you want to stick a knife in your head. Because of that. So it's multifaceted with that. But again, it's only what we see. Mm-hmm. This is the weird thing. Even when you speaking about the science evidence, we just assume that all these people are following the science-based evidence. But I wonder, if I was to travel and just go to 100 different gyms in the next 100 days with people that are trained seriously, I'm going to guarantee most of them are not doing the stuff that we'd see in the science-based community. Mm-hmm. Right. So we assume, based upon what we see, this is reality. Yeah. When it's not, it's screen reality. Yeah. It's not real world reality. Mm-hmm. So it becomes really hard to try to figure out what's really going on. Yeah. Right. Even with things like authenticity, this person's authentic. It's no, if they made a post on social media, that's not them.
That's not them.
It's so that becomes weird. Oh, you're so authentic. You're no, he's not. Yeah. He films. Have you ever filmed anything?
Yeah. That fifth take looked really authentic.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to know what goes through my head when I wake up in the morning. You don't want to know what goes through my head most of the time. Yeah. If I put this shit out there, I'd be canceled. So would you. So would you. Yeah. That's nobody's truly authentic. Yeah. I hate all you motherfuckers. You know what I'm saying? Then you got to dial it back and say, actually, no, I don't hate everybody. But so.
I think that's it. Is there's a lot more internal debate that goes on in our heads. Anything we talk about, anything we do, than I think we ever let on. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I was thinking about as you were saying that is a lot of times I don't even think we realize some of the things we do and take for granted in what we do. Because I was just thinking about working, and what you get by working with somebody one-on-one. What I think people don't know about what I do and what people actually don't know about what I do could be two very different things. Mm-hmm. What are when you have somebody come in and you say, okay, well, we're going to teach you how to squat. I'm just taking a big example. What are the first things that I look at? What are the first things that you look at? What are the first things that you look at? What is the difference in assessment? What are the difference in the cues you give? What is the difference in the language that you use, communicating each one? What is the order of importance that you place on? All of these are so unique. And that may not necessarily be what comes out. And those could be the critical differentiators in why some people's methods of teaching are more effective than others. Mm-hmm. But we may not even realize where our unique value comes in. You talk to people and you say, well, okay, so what are the core principles of this discipline for you in your mind. And you may put out the things that you think are most important for people to hear, but those may not be the things that make you so much better than everyone else in the field. And no one's going to know that unless they work with you. And then someday randomly in their 4th week and you're explaining something and they go, I've never heard that explained that way. Like that's mind blowing. That makes sense. Like I've never thought about it that way. And you go, well, that's how I've always thought about it. That might be that thing. And I think that's what's missing in so much dialogue is like, oh yeah, when I coach this, I always emphasize this. Didn't even think that was important. Well, yeah. And chances are that's never been studied. That's never been critically evaluated because other people may not even realize, you may not even realize that what you do is in some way different. And again, I think a lot of that is what's missing is this kind of institutional idea that, hey, we do a lot of unique stuff and we don't realize it. And that's often where the difference is. Those little things that we do, those little things that we teach, the little things that we think about, our own way of thinking, our own modes of thinking about certain things are all so unique as coaches. And I think people who've been doing it for a while, that's what's so hard to pass on unless someone is willing to take the time and listen to us and sometimes even our not greatest moments. So
now when you're speaking about the coaches keeping the meticulous records and so forth, and then being able to share that with that, because you're a person that does that, been coaching for over a decade, right?
Is 21 years?
21 years. Is that what this new book is compared to the original hybrid?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of this was, the original hybrid book was looking at a lot of things that I just kind of noticed. I'm going, oh, okay, here are some trends. Here's some trends I've noticed. Here's some best practices I found. At this point, I've finally been able to look back and go, okay, look, okay, I've been doing this for enough years now. I've been implementing these ideas in pretty much about 10 years between the two books. And I can actually say, here's what mattered. Here's what I thought mattered that didn't actually matter. Here are the things I started incorporating and paying attention to that actually made a difference over time. And that took a lot of time. It's why I say, like, when someone tells you, oh yeah, I'm experienced, I've been doing this for 5 years. And you go, oh, 5 years in, I hadn't made any big mistakes yet because I didn't know enough to know what my mistakes were. And, I think, again, it's okay. I haven't, there goes the cycle where you first learn things, then you start developing your own ideas, then you start implementing your own ideas, then you start testing them. You realize half of them suck. You try some new ideas, you start implementing, like each one of those cycles can take years and years and years. And I think as you go through that, the more often you go through that, the more fine-tuned this all becomes. I think that's what gets lost.
So what did you learn writing the book? Because you would have had to have looked back over a lot of your practice and there may have been some hard truths in there with like something that you really like. And you're like, oh, actually, that didn't really do much.
Well, so the funny thing was when I wrote this book, I had 2 ways I could go. I could have taken the old one and refined it. And I decided that was going to make me editorialize too much and try to stick with old ideas. So I just wrote this from scratch. So I actually, believe it or not, haven't actually compared the two next to each other to say, okay, what have I changed and what have I not?
Well, that would be interesting.
Oh man. Because I think the thing is like and thinking about this, there are a lot of things I did kind of end up discarding. And that was like a lot of the ideas of consolidation of stressors, for example, I've changed completely. And there's a lot of nuance to it and everything else, but my views on that have changed pretty drastically. And I didn't even realize my thoughts had changed on that. I just, began changing my definition over time and thinking about it differently over time. And realizing that I had this rule that I had, and every single athlete was an exception to it to a certain extent. And I'm going, okay, wait a minute. I've got this rule and all I'm doing is managing exceptions to this rule. Oh yeah, maybe this is a garbage rule. So 3 years into it, I realized, okay, well, this rule doesn't apply in 95% of cases. It's not really a rule. Here's what I do instead. Here's how I actually do it. And I developed that rule because thinking about it like cognitively and thinking about like certain case studies, I was like, oh, okay, here's kind of the median approach to how I put these together. But that wasn't the actual case in anybody. It was just an average approach, an average way of looking at things that didn't actually bear out in any actual programming.
So now that you've written that book, you've mentioned that process, that learning, fine-tuning cycle. I presume, having written that, you've reflected, and now you're back at stage one, and you've probably got some ideas here that need to go through that iterative process. What are they?
Oh, it's actually hard right now to look back and say, all right, what needs to be reevaluated, and what. I think looking back at practice, a lot of biggest changes to my perspective have been on much more on the big picture, looking at the outcome. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of trying to structure the process, and a lot more of this idea that you could make an athlete into what you wanted to make them into. You have the perfect program, and you apply that to an athlete, they will be the best athlete. My approach overall has now been much more, you're given an athlete, you test their limitations, and you push them to their limits in every one of those areas to make them the same athlete they already are, just better in every possible way. So rather than taking this great idea and applying it to the athlete, I take the athlete and create the program based on who the athlete is and what they can do. And I know it's like kind of almost an arbitrary sounding distinction, but it's much more a test and verify, test and verify, test and adapt, rather than it is program and evaluate, program and evaluate, program and evaluate. So it's a little bit more, you could say reactive, but I would say responsive now than it is prescriptive. And
have you found a radical change in outcome from that? Because it's a typical example would be like Dave's background with like West Side and dynamic. Like Dave will tell you there are some lifters that were explosive and dynamic effort worked very well, and there were some lifters that were not, and like the max effort work was the thing that did it for them. Are you finding now that with athletes you're kind of accepting their natural biases to some degree and just allowing them to bring everything up and just accepting that, like, hey, maybe you are a better runner than lifter and that's just how it's always going to be.
Yeah.
Are you finding more success with that now?
A lot more success. I think one of the biggest things that I started, again, like not really realizing what you do until you have the chance to talk to somebody about it. One of the biggest things was thinking that if a lifter wants to excel at running, they already have plenty of strength. So their running program should just be like a lot of base work. Mm-hmm. But realizing that lifter has a tremendous amount of coordination and explosiveness and movement proficiency, why not take advantage of that and actually give them a larger amount of explosive work, a larger amount of plyometrics, bounding work? They take to that so well. Let's leverage their current strength in that area and make them just a technically extremely proficient running, because they have that body awareness. Mm-hmm. Take advantage of that in their programming. Don't just start throwing them out there to slog endless miles. Let's take this athlete and take all the advantages that they have, that their training history has given them, and use that and react to that and say, oh, wow, they're really good at this. Yeah, let's keep doing that. Let's leverage that. Because in the past, I would have said, they just need that aerobic base. Let's just get them on an incline. Let's have them walk on a 15% incline for 40 minutes, 4 times a week. Let's build up that base. Still important, but let's take advantage of the fact that they already have tremendous athletic capability in one area and already catapult them to the advanced side of some of the explosive work and running efficiency work and economy work and even sprinting work, because that's still going to be a part of their overall development in this new sport. So why not allow that athlete to actually be good at something in this new discipline?
So something I wanted to ask you about was working with like the military and special forces individuals that you do, because we had Jordan Betts out here a while ago, and that's where he kind of plies his trade. Mm-hmm. And sounds like an almost impossible landscape in a way, in terms of the unpredictability of it, right?
Yeah.
And what you're talking about here in terms of this hybrid application of training, there's a lot of nuance and individualization and kind of walking a fine line of total workload and stuff. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that landscape then when you're dealing with special forces operatives who at the drop of a hat can go on an operation or whatever it might be?
Well, that's actually one of the strengths of it, is because it is so reactive and responsive. Like, we're constantly looking at recovery parameters. We're looking at, since again, communicating intent of a workout is so important. It's easier to adapt, because if someone's just been out in the field, you quickly find out, okay, how are you feeling when you get back? What's currently taxed? What are you feeling? What can you do today? What productive work can you do for the next 48 hours that you've gotten back? It lets us really say, all right, coming back, you're sleep deprived and this is off and you haven't eaten and this is off and that's off. Okay, what productive work in your program out of this whole variety of different pieces that we put together? Which pieces can we take and actually have you still do productively now? Because again, intent of the workout is so important. So maybe 8 things are off the table, but 1 or 2 things that we still have identified as their performance objectives can still be done. Pardon me, in a highly fatigued state. So by being this responsive, by having this responsiveness such an element of how we look at programming, it's actually not unusual, because I do have quite a number of clients who are in the field fairly consistently, or one of them is, we'll travel for a week here or a week there, and just flights being as they are, he'll say, yeah, we were scheduled to leave, and 12 hours beforehand they canceled the whole thing. And as a result, we'll have to flex. He'll be in areas with really bad gyms, so we say, okay, let's switch to this kind of run today, or if you're in a limited gym and your legs are absolutely trashed, here's the one workout, or the one session that we still think you're capable of doing. So it's a very flexible, adaptable type of program, because it's a lot like a good hybrid program has a lot of different kind of modular components that you have a optimal way to fit together in terms of the best order, but you can also adjust it as long as you get those critical pieces in there somewhere.
So when you're working with that kind of demographic as well, is that where you mentioned that you use primarily a concurrent approach as opposed to blocks and whatever? Does that even become even more important with these? Because you can't have an operative be like, oh, well, I know I need to do this on operation, but I'm in the middle of a strength block right now, so my conditioning's not really that great, so
exactly
in those scenarios, does that kind of did that maybe help you reinforce that was probably the right way to go with this type of programming?
Yeah, exactly. Because, first of all, in multi-sport, there's no such thing as a real season, because, you've got a lot of events throughout the year. And especially for this population, there's no point at which they can afford to go into a base building phase, or so it really is very much okay, let's just look at them as a moving line of recovery. And what can we work up to that line? And certain things are going to bring that line down. Certain things are going to let it come up. How do we keep everything improving, assuming that we need flat performance across the board, performance improving across the board while still staying under that recovery line? So it very much makes it a case of there's always something productive they can do. And it always has to be well-rounded.
Sure. Do you think, though, that idea, that basic structure, that whole premise of training there is something that more Gen Pop could take advantage of, or should see? Because you'll get Gen Pop individuals will overcomplicate their training. They will think they need these complex periodization schemes, all these blocks and whatever. Whereas, for them, it could be this simple as just try and get a tiny bit better on everything at the same time, because you probably are at a point where you can do that. So do you find that, then bleeding down with more of your Gen Pop clients, you're bringing down this concurrent structure and they're kind of like, oh, well, I'm used to peaking this at this point and this over here, and you kind of have to show them this other way.
Yeah. And that's a big thing too, because I'll work with new clients and they'll say, oh, well, how many weeks will the program be like? What am I going to be doing for the first couple of weeks? And I'm going, I don't know yet. We really have to see what you're capable of doing, and we really have to see where you're at and everything. And even if they have an event 16 weeks away, I'm going to say, I don't know what this is going to look like in 14 weeks, because I don't know what you're capable of now. I'm not sure how you're going to respond to it. We can do complex periodization schedules, but that may not necessarily be the best thing for you. So it's a lot more, again, you don't need a complex periodization scheme, because, yes, obviously there might be an event or 2 events we want you to train for, but for the most part, we want the flexibility to continue making you into the best athlete we can make you, rather than thinking about this as being endpoint driven. In other words, we make the training the best it can be, and when the event arrives, we'll have you be the best you can be, rather than saying, okay, the event is here, let's work backwards from that.
Sure.
What's interesting to me, just listening to everything that you've said, is it pulls me back when I was still working as a personal trainer, and the people I was working with they didn't train for 15 years. I mean, it's Gen Pop to the Gen Pop extreme, right? And my role was to make them stronger, better cardiovascular health, more mobile, more flexible if need be, like 5 different metrics, broad-based metrics to be able to move them through. And over a period of years, they get better and better and better and better. All you're doing is a big extension of that, right? Just the continuation of that, say 10, 15 more years with the opportunity or the ability to maybe do a run here or a powerlifting meet here or something. It's in simplest form, it's the continuation of exercise in its purest form across all modalities. Right. And where I think people get this mixed up is a lot of us will start with that exercise phase, training for sport or whatever it's going to be. And then we'll pivot right into the powerlifting or into the bodybuilding or to a bench or whatever it's going to be. And then the structure, the periodization structure comes boom, right in our face. Like, here's the way that you peak for X. Yeah. Right. Even if it's endurance, like you can find those peaking protocols to do your first 5K and all that shit. And then when you go back, and you're in that position of, I'm just going to be this exercise person, you think it has to fit the modality of the specialization that you did. Yeah. And then when you try to bring it in, you're like, you start stacking. Like that's where people screw up, is they start stacking. Yep. Where you've essentially just conjugated all that, into this system. Is that a good analysis of what?
Exactly. Because it's saying, like, obviously, as you get better, you have to get more precise. Like you can't just continue to throw basic strength and conditioning at people, or we're going to lift for 45 minutes and then jump on the stair climber for 20 minutes. Like, that's not going to work after a period of time. But that doesn't mean you have to fundamentally change like the overall emphases. You just need to be smarter about them and more precise, and take them a little bit more seriously. Okay, well, you're not just going to strength train. Now we're going to do a more targeted strength training program that's divided into, like, let's say, more discrete sessions with more discrete objectives. We're creating more specific objectives in each area, but overall, we are still aiming for, like you said, like this concurrent, well-rounded approach, rather than discrete training blocks and training cycles and all that, which we can still have to a certain extent. But for the most part, what we're doing is we're saying, we are aiming for steady, again, sort of like responsive programming that allows for this concurrent improvement. Like, that's it.
So how does this, first on a personal level, because this is going to be the question I'm more interested in, as we get older, we lose things, right? We lose abilities, but we gain abilities. So it's a trade. I mean, if you're smart, you'll find that there's a trade, right? If you're not, you just see shit being lost. So how have you had to pivot your own training based upon your age? And the reason why I'm separating that is I can say, how can this hybrid model work with different age groups? But a lot of that's going to depend upon what their pre-experience is. You get somebody coming in at 40 that's never done anything. It's different than somebody that beat the shit out of them playing in the NFL for 14 years and comes in at 40. But age is still a variable that we all have to fight, dance with, is a better way to represent that. So how have you had to migrate that? Because with that, it's going to age, injuries, there's all these different, the injury is a different pivot than age, right? Because age is another one.
Yeah, and what's funny is that fundamentally, I think the programs that I follow now are fairly similar to what I used to, but at the same time, it's the individual sessions that are highly stressful are much more like the sessions tend to be a little briefer. They're a little bit more spaced out. My progression week to week, like I may spend more time at a given weight. I may spend a little more time now doing more dynamic effort work, because one of the things I'm finding I'm losing the fastest is explosiveness. I have a lot more, I don't want to say movement fear, but let's just say movement caution. As you get older, you're a little bit less likely to want to move explosively. Everything is okay, greater control, and okay, like let's make sure everything is much more deliberate. So I've developed a little bit more, I say movement caution, I think. So my overall training program has just shifted to spend more time working on those things that I realize that I'm losing that aren't necessarily more stressful. Like, for example, I know like probably in another 10 years, I'm not going to be hitting all-time PRs. It's probably just not going to happen. I mean, it'd be nice if it did, but it's probably not going to happen. But what I'm going to realize is that I'm going to have to keep fighting the degradation of certain performance parameters, and I'm going to have a greater emphasis on that. So overall, like I may be doing marginally less work when I run. I might be being much more targeted about my running sessions. I might be doing fewer quote unquote recovery runs and doing more alternate modality recovery work. On the lifting side of things, the amount of time I spend doing actual competition lifts has gone down. My shoulders are all janky. I have to use movement variance a lot more often. So a lot of this stuff is kind of evolving to both pay attention to the fact that my recovery is a little bit slower, but also finding productive work that I now have to place greater emphasis on that used to be a factor I didn't even have to really think about nearly as often.
Have you found your body weight to be an issue over the years with the running?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm almost as heavy as I've ever been. I think I've been maybe 5 or 10 pounds heavier at one point. And that's probably kept my running from ever being, especially like trail running and ultra running. Like I still have not been able to do a 100-miler. And I think just for me, the calories I need.
I'm thinking more just the joint wear and tear, the force.
Yeah. So I actually made a switch several years ago to a lot more, well, I'll say close to a decade ago at this point, to a lot more trail running and a lot more like different surface running. And like I decided at the time, I'm going to be a really good uphill runner. I'm going to be able to just dominate the uphills. Obviously, that's not the case. I'm objectively pretty terrible at uphill running, but I'm better than I've ever been. Mm-hmm. And in making this the focus, uphill running is a lot less wear and tear. It's a lot less impact, a lot less things like that. So in making that switch proactively, I've sort of accommodated for the fact that, yeah, my joints don't like as much impact these days just because I'm older. Certainly at a higher body weight, I don't like it that much because I'm older. I can't get away with just adding on more of that flat running volume because I'm just not going to recover from it. And
sorry, as a tangent, apologies in advance, but I got to ask this question. What does nutrition look like for a 220-pound marathon runner who's doing full-on marathon training?
Well, it's most of the time it's pretty reasonable, and I think I'm pretty sedentary otherwise, just because my job has me sitting at a desk 24/7. But yeah, for the most part, I've been pretty consistent with what I've eaten. I'm like I have like a 3,500 calorie basic intake that I just keep, and that's more or less every day. And then on high run days, I usually just let myself calibrate up to it, which usually involves like a Wendy's trip afterwards or something like that. But my thing has always been just a core set of nutrition guidelines that gets me everything I need, assuming a kind of minimal activity day, and then just calibrating up to it. And the thing is, I don't do crazy high calorie days anymore. Like even if I'm, doing something where I'll burn 3,500, 4,000 calories in a workout, I don't try to get those back in one day. I mean, part of that is the body can't even really absorb that. Mm-hmm. But the other part of that is just, I know the GI distress from that is going to be not worth it. So I'll just say, all right, like over the next 3 to 4 days, I'm just going to keep a steadily elevated caloric intake and just compensate for that over time. Sure. So it's, it generally, it's like it averages about 4,100 to 4,200 a day. But, I still have pretty low calorie days. Like I think yesterday, for example, traveling, it was pretty low, but I didn't worry about it because, at the same time, I know, when I was younger, I thought I was going to lose it all. If I didn't continue to eat properly over a couple of days, I was going to lose everything. And strength is going to suffer for a couple of days, but it'll bounce right back. So that's what my intake is like.
Cool. I'm going to speculate, but I'm pretty sure I'm right that as long as you've been doing this, there's been phases to where you don't want to do it.
Oh yeah.
Right. You just don't want to train. And when you enter those phases, if we're smart, we find what the absolute minimum that you absolutely have to do is. So during one of those worst phases, what was the absolute least minimum that you had to do to stay engaged, even though you still don't like doing that minimum, but you need to do it?
Yeah. Like there've been 2 phases. When I got really, really sick of running, the most I could bring myself to do was 1 to maybe 2 20-minute treadmill sessions per week. And I would just try to do those after a lift. And I would even sometimes just put it on a slight decline, so that the numbers didn't look quite so bad. And it was just like, I knew obviously like, because not recording any of it. I'm just like for my own psyche, but it was the only way that I could bring myself to do 20 minutes of just jogging on a treadmill. Honestly, same thing for the biking. Like there was a long time when I was doing a lot of Q&As on Instagram. And part of that was I didn't want to cycle outside anymore. I hated where I was. I was sick of, getting all my bike stuff together. I didn't like it. So I said, all right, I'm just going to force myself to sit on a bike trainer, answer questions for 30 minutes, a couple times a week. And that's how I'm going to get my cycling in. And it was pretty minimum. I mean, we're talking like 60 minutes of zone 2 for somebody like over the course of a week for somebody who, was riding 150, 200 miles a week when he was training.
Well, I think this is an important topic because people will see you or anybody that's been in the industry for a long time and just think that you love training all the time.
Oh yeah. No.
And it's like, no, man, I guarantee there's been times where that's not the case at all. And it's, you find I found mine, you find the absolute minimum.
Yeah,
like
you do.
This is what it takes. And then
Absolutely.
you just hope over time you break out of that. Then it all comes back and you do.
Yeah, you do. I always kind of like it to, not to get too seriously here, but when people say like, if you're dealing with like depression or low motivation, like just go through the motions so you don't lose any of the things that matter. Try to stick to routines. So like when you're ready for them, they'll still be there for you. And that's why I always tell people about this. Like, if I go through periods where I don't want to be running, I run just enough. Yeah, I'm not loving it, but there's going to be a time when I get back to it and I want it to be there. I don't want to be so far away from it that I can't lean back into it. So all the time, every lift, every type of lifting, running, swimming, biking, like I've hated them all at one point. And like really hated some of them more than others, but yeah. And, it's, you want to keep it there. So it's there for you when you're ready for it. And it's the absolute bare minimum.
When you've gone through those phases, as someone who has multifaceted fitness endeavors, has it been the case that it's one of them and then the other one is still good, or have there been phases where all of them nosedive together?
That there've been, when all of them nosedive, that's when I've typically tried to find something else.
Okay.
Like there was a period of time there when I hated everything so much. I went through the crisis, and I think some people go the jiu-jitsu route. Other people, like I used to box back in high school and for a while afterwards, just a couple of years. And so I just bought myself a heavy bag and just started training again. And that got me through about a 2-month, 3-month period where I just didn't want to do anything else. Is I would just go hit the bag, and that was my great release. And it was great because I still had my time during the day when I would get down there to the gym and I just do the bare minimum lifting, and then I would go hit the bag for a while, and then occasionally just go for a walk and maybe jump on the treadmill occasionally. So it was just enough, but it was finding something else. And usually something is there that you still love. There's still some redeeming quality in your program you can find, however small it may be. Yeah. But sometimes you just gotta find something that you used to do, or you find something new. I've told people jiu-jitsu or pickleball. That's kind of the direction people go with the two.
Is that one of the hidden benefits of the hybrid approach though? Because first off, there's less chance that you get sick of all your training at the same time. Mm-hmm. And then should the nosedive happen, you're pretty fit and capable. You probably can pick up pickleball or BJJ for a couple of months because you're reasonably well-rounded. Whereas the person over here who's done one type of training for 30 years, it's kind of like, well, you can't do it. You are in a proper funk now for 3 months where you got no options.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. It's like half the joy of this. Like I said, like really early on in this discussion, like life takes things from you. And I don't mean that in like a sad or depressing way. I just mean things change. Yeah. Sometimes taking things from you just means you don't have the time anymore. Mm-hmm. You don't have the motivation. You don't have the energy. You don't have the energy needed to progress in a way that makes something satisfying for you. Mm-hmm. So you want to be capable enough that you can just do something else, even if it's ridiculous. Like, honestly, one of my clients, he just got completely burned out. He started playing disc golf. Mm-hmm. And he loved it because he was like, yeah, I'm getting out there and I'm walking, and yeah, it's not tremendously aerobically taxing, but he's like, I love the fact that I can get through and do like a full course and not waste any time. He's like, I feel fit. So for me, spending a couple hours out there in the sun going through this, it's great. It's easy. I was like, that's everything right there. Mm-hmm. And knowing that he could do that kind of inspired him to keep doing the occasional lift and the occasional run. He's like, I realized that this let me do something else that was fun, and I want to keep that, and I don't want to ever lose that.
Yeah.
What is the best way people can find you? So we kind of close this out.
Yeah, honestly, my Instagram is the main thing. Just alex.viada. My company, Complete Human Performance, has an Instagram as well and a website. Those are pretty much the best ways. There's going to be a new website coming out for the book that's going to talk about it a little bit more. But if you follow any one of those on Instagram, that's going to be probably the best way to find me.
When will the book come out?
December 2nd, 5th? Which is it? December 2nd.
December 2nd.
2nd.
Yes.
2nd. Yes.
And where would you like people to pick it up at? Because I know it's a pre-order.
Yes.
On Amazon.
Amazon is probably a favorite. It's on Barnes and Noble as well.
Yeah.
But I would say Amazon would be the big one.
Where you compensated the most?
I think it's actually the same.
Okay.
But my thing is, honestly, I just wanted as many people's hands as possible because it's been my dream to get this thing done for a long time. I mean, like I said, 10 years ago, people wanted a hard copy. In this case, I'm like, finally, I could write down just everything that I thought was important from scratch. And it's been a lot of fun.
No, it looks great. I thumbed through it earlier, guys, and only 5 pages were diagrams of people doing exercises, which I think is important, as I noted before, because it's dense and it's got a lot of material in there.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for coming out. Do you have any final thoughts?
Oh man, no, just I wanted to say I really, really appreciate this. And especially coming from the perspective, one of the things I really want more hybrid athletes to know about as well is just, or people who are interested in it, is just the depth of knowledge that exists in the strength training space. And one of the things I want people to spend a lot more time looking at things from guys like yourself who've just been in the strength training field for a long period of time. Because like I said, every sport is a new language. Every sport has something new to learn. Every mindset is so invaluable. And I think there's a lot of endurance voices in the space right now. And I think I would just love for a lot of the people interested in hybrid sport to start really listening to a lot more people who just know what they're talking about and have been around elite strength training for a long period of time. So for me, this has been really, really, really exciting. Wanted to take the chance just to say thank you so much for having me on. And it's been great.
No, thank you for coming out, and we're done.
Thank you.
Yeah, excellent.
All content you see on this channel and at elitefts.com is created by, take a guess, Elite FTS. If you want to help support the content, head over to elitefts.com and pick up literally anything that you need to be able to get more jacked and strong.